No matter what happens, don't stop. We almost got it. Two treasure seekers are digging frozen ground in a cornfield at night. It's raining hard, lightning is flashing, but these two guys keep working. And now the shovel hits something solid. No way! A treasure chest! They start digging faster and find a piece of a ship's engine. What the? Far from the seas and lakes, somewhere under the fields of Kansas City, they found a giant sunken ship. How is this possible? Now you'll see. Some people spend their lives searching for shipwrecks with treasures underground. One of them is explorer David Hawley. He's been looking for such ships far from the seas, rivers, and oceans for many years. He does this because he likes the feeling of adventure. The holds of these ships may contain chests of gold, antiques, and artifacts. And you can get a lot of money for them. David says you don't have to go into the ocean to find a sunken ship. They may be lying in your backyard. But why do ships end up buried underground among fields, farms, and plains? Let's find out using the example of Steamboat Great White Arabia. According to old records, the newspaper clippings, this ship had been carrying about 200 tons of treasure before it sank in 1856. Many rumors and local legends said the ship was lying underground, a few miles northeast of Kansas City. It was there because people deliberately altered the riverbed and channels of the Missouri River in the second half of the 19th century. They artificially brought the shores closer to each other. They narrowed the river to increase the flow's speed, so boats could sail much faster. In the 19th century, steamboats were the most popular means of transporting passengers and goods. Before railroads, they extended the western border across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and brought supplies to people. That's why it was so important to increase the speed of their movement. So, on September 5, 1856, Arabia was sailing along such an estuary. It came across a snag sticking out of the water. A piece of log quickly flooded the ship. Fortunately, all passengers were evacuated. But the steamer and its precious cargo reached the silt bottom of the Missouri River in a few minutes. Several years had passed. Everyone forgot about the vessel. During this time, the course of the Missouri River had changed. But Arabia remained under the wet, muddy bottom. The soil level above it was getting higher, and the ground was losing moisture. Eventually, many decades later, a cornfield formed above the sunken ship. In the 1980s, one farmer owned this area, and he had no idea what was hidden in his territory. David Hawley carefully studied the history of the sunken ships of the USA. He knew that hundreds of steamers had gone underwater all over Missouri, but most of all, he was interested in Arabia, as there were rumors that it was filled with gold and other valuable things. The territory of cornfields in Kansas was vast, but David Hawley knew how to search properly. In 1987, he started working. First, together with his brother and father, they collected all the clippings from old newspapers they could find. They were looking not only for information about the steamer, but also for maps of the Missouri River. They tracked its historical changes, checked the dates, and identified a large area where the steamer sank. Next, they used electromagnetic testing and other geological stuff to study the soil and find the right place. They searched for differences in ground moisture and density. Then, they went through the territory with powerful metal detectors. And so, by the fall of 1988, they had determined the location of the steamer. Arabia was the size of a football field. This gigantic vessel lay 45 feet underground, 4 stories down. But before they started excavating, they had to ask the owner of the cornfield for permission. For the farmer, this news was a big surprise. He agreed, on the condition that the excavations would be completed by spring so that he could sow a new crop. Digging a giant ship in winter is much more difficult and expensive than at other times. It includes additional equipment, electricity, and heating costs. The team worked day and night. They financed the excavations out of their own pocket. Each invested more than $10,000 and took out a bank loan. Finally, they noticed the first details of the ship. The shovels hit the huge engine boilers and the deck. The goal had been achieved. Most of the cargo lying inside the sunken ships is covered with rust, shells, mud, and is badly damaged. The contents of Arabia were in excellent condition, considering that the ship had sunk 130 years prior. Unfortunately, they didn't find the chests of gold. Still, they got several tons of other valuable cargo, household items of people who lived in the middle of the 19th century. It was a time capsule. The ship was carrying supplies for hundreds and thousands of people, and all these things were perfectly preserved. For example, they could clearly see the brand stamp Goodyear Rubber Company on one rubber shoe. The longer the excavations continued, the more things David and his team found. In the barrels, they found plates from the 19th century. They were intact and usable. Also, there were clean clothes, thousands of pairs of shoes, harpoons, frying pans, and umbrellas. The ship was carrying cargo to supply about 16 small towns. Yes, it's not gold, but such artifacts are also precious. The contents of the ship could be worth millions. However, the crew wasn't going to sell these things. They made a museum on the site of a former fruit market in Kansas City. If you go there, you will immediately feel like you're in a department store of the 19th century. There are thousands of items in good condition. Even the matches here are dry enough to light up. It took David many years to present the entire collection from the steamship. He values each of the items and doesn't want to sell them. Anyone can come here, pay for a ticket, and find themselves in the past. Who knows, maybe there's an old ship hidden in your backyard too. Geologists found an older vessel in the hot desert of Namibia in 2008. This ship sailed back in the days when pirates scared sailors on the seas, and now it's inside a dried-up lagoon. The ship sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared with the crew near a small diamond mining town. After almost 500 years, the hull had been badly damaged. Only the carcass of the ship remained, but the treasure hidden inside the vessel stayed intact. They carefully studied the boat for a long time, trying not to ruin anything. And then, 5 days later, they found a big old chest in the hold. Carefully opening it, they found gold coins there. Thus, the cost of the ship was estimated at about $10 million. The exact cause of the shipwreck is unknown, but experts believe the ship was destroyed by heavy cargo and bad weather. It went to the bottom of a lagoon that later became a desert. Some find an airplane in their backyard, others discover a ship, and one man found a passage to an ancient secret city in his house. This happened in Turkey in 1963. The owners of the building decided to make repairs. He went to his basement and knocked down the wall to turn this place into a living room. And so, behind one wall, he found a tunnel leading underground. The man thought it was some kind of a secret chamber. He went down there and realized it was something much more than that. It was an ancient city 18 floors deep. People built it in the years 780 to 1180 as a refuge from weather disasters and the invasion of enemies. This place also includes many underground tunnels that stretch for several miles in different directions. People could get to the town from different points using secret passages leading to these roads. The city can accommodate about 20,000 residents, livestock, and tons of food supplies. Archaeologists have also found a chapel, schools, stables, and public kitchens there. There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land, so they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings. And they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the Canal zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
It's 2018. You get up early in the morning to go ashore and catch some fish. You come to the spot you were yesterday, throw the hook into the sea, and wait. The float is twitching. You've caught some fish, but hey, hello? Why aren't you doing anything? Right now, you don't care about the fish. You're looking at something in the distance. You open your mouth in surprise since you see a huge ship stuck on a shoal. It wasn't here yesterday, so it got here at night. Okay, it'll probably sail away sooner or later. You fish for a few more hours. During this time, you observe the ship and notice no movement there. Is it empty? Boats and the Coastal Service are sailing from the shore to the vessel. You decide to check it out too. You get in your old boat and go there. The mist descends to the water, making the ship look creepy. The colossal vessel is rusty and empty. But where is the whole crew? And how did it get there? The Coast Guard comes on board. They search the hold, the cabins, and the upper deck. There's someone's stuff, some remnants of food supplies, notebooks, and clothes. Everything suggests the crew has disappeared for some reason. Fishers who noticed the vessel first didn't see anyone coming down from the board. No radio signals were sent to the port, and no one reported about the ship. It appeared here from nowhere. The only chance to get any information is to look at the number and name of the vessel. This is Sam Ratulangi, PB 1600. The Coast Guard checks the information, studies the data of all the country ships, and no way. One company built the boat in 2001 in Indonesia. People used it to transport heavy loads across the seas around Asia. The ship had been properly operating for 8 years. People were delivering industrial goods to different points in the region, but something went wrong. In 2009, Sam Ratulangi was sailing near the coast of Taiwan, and that's it. There were no further records about it. There were no reports in any port. Everyone thought it must have drowned, so no one had been looking for it for years. And then, 9 years later, it appears here, big and rusty, off the coast of Myanmar, without sailors, without fuel. An investigation starts. City services are trying to find out the names of all the sailors working on the ship and find clues that would lead to solving this mystery. They also hope the ship owner will appear soon. They find 2 tow ropes on board. This means that some other ship towed Sam Ratulangi to this place. Then they identify and find 13 crew members. These people say they wanted to reach the factory in Bangladesh to repair Sam Ratulangi. Another vessel helped tow the ship, but then 2 cables tore off, and a storm began. No one wanted to stay on board during such weather, so the crew members left it. No one knows what the ship has been doing for the last 9 years, and how it was possible without people on board. And here's another, much more mysterious ship story. On February 16, 2020, locals found a large cargo ship stuck on a rocky shore off the coast of an Irish village. The boat looked rusty, with holes in the hull and rotten parts. People hadn't seen this vessel the day before, so it appeared there at night. The last time people saw the Alta cargo ship was a few months earlier, thousands of miles off the coast of Ireland. That day, the Alta was sailing in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Another ship, the MS Protector, noticed it. MS Protector crew members tried to contact the ship, but received no response. The people on board realized that they were facing an empty vessel. And then, 5 months later, it appeared near the coast of Ireland. There are more questions than answers in this story, but we managed to find something out. In 2015, the Alta appeared and disappeared from the radar several times. Any ship has an internal tracking system, so people can track its route using satellites. But Alta crew members often disabled this system. Perhaps they were engaged in some illegal activity. Anyway, in 2017, the ship often sailed between the ports of Greek islands. Then, the tracking signal disappeared and appeared only 10 months later, off the coast of North Africa. During this time, the ship changed several flags. In September 2018, the Alta was southeast of Bermuda and headed for Haiti. Then, the crew started facing problems. First, the main engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship began to drift. Several days passed, but the crew members weren't able to repair it. They began to run out of food and water supplies. The situation got even worse when they found out that a hurricane was approaching the place. Fortunately, they managed to contact the U.S. Coast Guard. A helicopter flew to the Alta on October 2nd to bring them some supplies. There was enough food for several days. Then, a rescue boat sailed to the ship. It evacuated all the sailors and delivered them to Puerto Rico before the hurricane. The Alta had to drift alone in the ocean. After a while, another ship approached the Alta to tow it to the shores of Guyana. But at this moment, everything went wrong. Someone stole the boat, disabled the tracking system, and sailed away in an unknown direction. After almost a year, the MS Protector found the empty Alta in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, 9 months later, the ship without a crew sailed to the shores of Ireland. How did it manage to travel across the Atlantic and get to the coast of Ireland? It's still a mystery. Maybe it was just luck. No one else saw the ship all this time. It was just covering huge distances, surviving storms. Who's the captain? What happened to the thieves? Who owns the ship now? One day, someone called the village administration and introduced themselves as the vessel owner. But that unknown person didn't provide any evidence. They found several barrels of oil on the ship, which they took away by helicopter. The Alta was rusting. Corrosion of metal could damage the environment. The vessel had no commercial value, yet it would have taken millions to get rid of it. There were 3 options for what to do: leave the ship where it was, tow it into the sea and let it sink, or disassemble it for scrap. But nature had its own plans. Storms and strong waves split the hull into 2 parts. The Alta was drifting without a crew in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2 years. But this is nothing compared to a ship that was traveling for 38 years. The record belongs to the SS Baychimo. It was a merchant vessel owned by some trading company. In 1931, the ship found itself on the ice off the coast of Alaska. Its movement slowed down. A thick layer of ice blocked the ship, and a strong storm only made the situation worse. The blizzard was so intense that the crew members couldn't see anything but a white veil in front of their eyes. Sailing any further was impossible. The team had to wait for the storm to end. They waited for a day, 2, 3 days. A week had passed, but the snowstorm was only getting stronger. Then, one day, it grew weaker. The crew members split into 2 teams. The first team went to the nearest city. The second group, along with the captain, stayed on board. They set up camp next to the ship and waited for the blizzard, which had started again, to end. There was 0 visibility. And finally, one day, the storm was over. Great! And now, wait a minute. But where is the ship? The SS Baychimo just disappeared during the blizzard. The captain was sure that the ship had sunk, so he left along with the crew. Then, a week later, they saw the vessel drifting near the area where they had lost it. The hull was damaged so severely that it was unsafe to sail on it. Repairing the ship would be pointless and expensive, so the captain decided to abandon it. He was sure that it would go underwater sooner or later, but it stayed afloat for the next few days, the next few months, and a few years. People had reported seeing it at various points along the coast of Alaska for 38 years. The last record of the SS Baychimo is dated 1969. Those who saw it claimed the ship was completely frozen, almost merged with the ice. Some people planned to start an expedition to find the ship, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The vessel is probably lying somewhere on the deep sea floor.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Baychimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Baychimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Baychimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Baychimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Baychimo. either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Baychimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who was to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions, this bending of light can create really bizarre optical illusions over the ocean, like sightings of the Flying Dutchman. The Fata Morgana phenomenon can make distant objects appear distorted, stretched, or even lifted above the horizon. So you can see a ship far away, but because of the way the light is bending, it will look like it's floating above the water or even disappearing and reappearing. A Fata Morgana is most commonly seen in polar regions, especially over large sheets of ice that have a uniform low temperature. But you can see it anywhere, even in deserts and over lakes on hot days. The first stories about ghost ships go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. One of the most famous ghost ships in history is the Mary Celeste. This brigantine was traveling from New York City to Genoa and was fully stocked with provisions, but missing a crew when it was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The crew's personal belongings were also there, completely undisturbed. The final entry in their log was made 10 days earlier. We still don't know what happened to its crew, and the ship has inspired many spooky stories and legends. The Lady Lovibond was another legendary schooner that is believed to have been wrecked off the coast of Kent in the middle of the 18th century. The story tells that the ship's captain, Simon Reed, had just got married and took his bride on board for a celebratory cruise, despite the superstition that it could bring bad luck. They were on their way to Portugal when the first mate, who is also in love with the captain's new wife, went mad because of jealousy, attacked another crew member, and then took over the wheel and steered the ship straight into the dreaded Goodwin Sands. No one aboard survived, and the schooner is said to reappear as a ghost vessel every 50 years. In present times, many vessels become abandoned and turned into ghost ships intentionally. There are thousands of them floating in U.S. rivers, lakes, channels, and coastal waters. Some people lose their boats in storms and other extreme weather. Others have to abandon their boats because maintaining them can cost 10% of the boat's price. Plus, docking a vessel can add up to several $1,000s every year. Most boats have been made of fiberglass, so an owner can't just recycle them as scrap metal. So, once they want to get rid of it, they often tie it to a dock and sneak away, or leave it floating far away from the shore, or just try to sink it. When ghost ships sink in shallow waters, they can cause damage to coral reefs, mangroves, marshlands, oyster habitats, and wetlands. Plus, they can collide with unsuspecting regular ships and cause real trouble. So, don't do that. Enough said.
As an experienced sailor and the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, Matt Rutherford has seen a lot during his voyages. But what he saw in 2013 while sailing through the waters of the Atlantic with his colleague surely stands out. Some 800 miles off the coast of Bermuda, not far away from the famous Bermuda Triangle, they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails weren't up and the motor wasn't running. The sailors decided to check if there was someone who needed their help aboard, so they moved closer to the mysterious ship. Once they got there, things only got weirder, as they realized there wasn't a living soul aboard. Rutherford started filming to document their discovery. The boat looked so awfully abandoned that they expected to find some pretty scary things in there. But it didn't stop Rutherford from searching the vessel. The boat, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, probably costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was pretty weird to find it floating by itself in the middle of the ocean. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. The brave sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. What really happened and how Wolfhound ended up in the middle of the ocean will probably remain a mystery. Rumor has it that it belonged to a member of the Royal Irish Yacht Club. The ship was going on its first voyage from Connecticut to Bermuda and then Antigua. It got in a terrible storm around 400 miles away from Delaware. The winds were so strong that the yacht suffered 2 knockdowns. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew. They left the ship with an emergency beacon on. The rescued crew members shared that they saw the ship sink, which only adds more questions to the story. How did it get back to the surface? Does the Bermuda Triangle have anything to do with that? Christopher Columbus himself reported some unusual compass activity going on in this mysterious area while he was on his way to the New World. Despite the stories of more than 50 ships and 20 planes disappearing in the area, it remains one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the Bermuda Triangle mystery. It could make sense because the busier the area, the more accidents happen there. But then again, it's not the number of disappearances that makes the place so mysterious. It's the lack of explanation and wreckage lost for good. The first ever confirmed ship to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle was the USS Pickering. In 1800, it departed from the US on its way to the West Indies. The ship sailed into the Bermuda Triangle along with its 90-man crew. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. The popular explanation is that the ship was taken out by a storm. But because no one found any wreckage, we'll never know for sure. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area was the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. The ship passed through the Bermuda Triangle on its journey and vanished into thin air, or rather, water. The Cyclops never sent any distress signal and disappeared without any explanation or trace. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only place in the world where ships go missing or mysteriously resurface. One of the most famous ghost ship stories would be of SS Baychimo. The large cargo steamer was built in Sweden. On October 1st, 1931, it got caught in pack ice. The crew decided to wait it out and managed to break free after a couple of days, only to get trapped again in less than a week. This time, they didn't manage to make it out. A rescue team went by air to save 22 of the crew members. 15 other members stayed in a wooden shelter they built not far away from the ship. Their plan was to wait out the winter and get back aboard. At the end of November, a strong blizzard was rushing through the area. When it was over, Baychimo seemed to have gone away with the storm. The captain decided it must have broken and sunk, but a few days later, a local hunter informed them that he had seen the ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew managed to find the ship and took the most valuable cargo from its hold. They had fears that Baychimo wouldn't live through that rough water, but it did manage to survive after all. Once the ice was gone, it floated away and ended up drifting along the shores of Canada and Alaska. Many people reported seeing the ghost ship in an open sea. Some even tried to board it to save the ship, but the weather didn't allow it to happen. The last time someone saw SS Baychimo was in 1969, 38 years after its crew had left it. It could still be drifting somewhere in the ocean. The story of MV Joyita happened in the South Pacific. The ship was originally a wooden luxury yacht. After serving for 20 years to various owners, it became a merchant ship. In 1959, it set on a trading voyage that was supposed to last around 2 days. When it didn't reach its destination on time, no one was worried at first as things happen in the open waters. After another day, and no distress signals from the Joyita, it was obvious that something serious was going on with it. There were 25 people aboard, and their families wanted to find them. A search and rescue crew worked for 6 days looking for the ship, or at least its wreckage, in an area of nearly 100,000 square miles. That's 1.5 times as big as Florida. Sadly, the mission had come back with no results. It seemed like Joyita had disappeared without a trace. A month later, another merchant ship noticed Joyita drifting in the ocean, miles and miles away from its original route, and none of the crew members or passengers were on board. The cargo had also disappeared. The lifeboats were also gone, so the people must have escaped the ship hoping to save themselves. It turned out that the crew had been trying to get help as they tuned the radio to the International Distress Channel. But the damaged cable didn't let them send the signal any further than 2 miles. It also looked like when they were leaving the ship, the crew took the logbook with them, and we still don't know what exactly happened to Joyita. Family members of those who were on board are still looking for answers. One professor claims it must have been a corroded pipe that leaked and flooded the vessel, but we'll most likely never know for sure. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there is an area nicknamed the Devil's Sea. It's believed to be one of the 12 vile vortices around the Earth. Some people claim that vile vortices have weird things going on in them because the pull of the planet's electromagnetic waves is stronger there than anywhere else. The most famous ship that disappeared in the area was a fishery patrol vessel in 1952. The ship went there to investigate the vessels that went missing previously and disappeared along with 31 crew members. Scientists who don't believe it was a mysterious disappearance blame the underwater volcano eruption for what happened.
They said it was the most technologically advanced ship. They said it was unsinkable. And when it sank, they made a movie about it. These were the main reasons why the Titanic disaster became world famous. But unfortunately, this is not the only large-scale shipwreck. And sadly, there have been cases much worse than the tragedy of the Titanic. One of them occurred on April 27, 1865. The Sultana steamboat carried passengers and cargo daily between St. Louis and New Orleans. It was a pretty large wooden boat with 3 decks and was 260 feet long and 70 feet wide, almost twice the size of a basketball court. The ship could carry about 350 passengers, but on that unfortunate day, more than 2,000 people were on it. On April 23rd, she was making a routine voyage from New Orleans when it broke down. Something was wrong with the boiler, so the vessel docked in Vicksburg for repairs. At the port, the ship's captain, James Cass Mason, found out about an excellent opportunity to earn a lot of money. All he needed to do was to transfer a large group of former prisoners to the north. The captain agreed to do it, but the problem was that the boiler required a lot of time to repair. Mason was afraid that his competitors would take the job, so he decided to sail despite the malfunction the ship had. He patched up the holes in the boiler instead of a big repair and invited all the ex-prisoners on board. So, there was a broken boiler, an excess number of passengers, a lack of lifeboats, and not the best river conditions. Also, the captain refused to send the ex-prisoners to the hold, so they were all with ordinary passengers. There were strong chances for a shipwreck, but the greedy desire to earn more money was stronger. The Sultana went on a voyage and sailed up the river for 2 days. At this time, one of the biggest Mississippi floods in history began. The river overflowed its shores because of the flood, with the water level rising several feet. All the trees on the shore disappeared, and only the tops were sticking out of the water. The ship sailed opposite this powerful current, making the boiler work too hard. On the evening of April 26th, the Sultana arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and they loaded even more, 120 tons of sugar and 200 passengers. She got incredibly heavy. Around midnight, the ship continued its dangerous journey. The captain sailed to barges to load a shipment of coal. At 1 a.m., the vessel left the barge. At 2 a.m., the broken boiler, unable to withstand the load, suddenly exploded. The Sultana was just 7 miles north of Memphis. Few people survived that day. The problem was that passengers trying to escape from the fire jumped into a cold river with a strong current. The Sultana disaster is considered the most tragic shipwreck in the history of the United States. The exact number of those who didn't survive is still unknown. According to various sources, this number was from 961 to 1,800 people. Don't be surprised that almost no one knows this story. There were many more survivors in the Titanic tragedy, and everybody heard about it. But the Sultana sank during one high-profile event. 12 days before the shipwreck, the country lost Abraham Lincoln. People hadn't yet recovered from this news, so no one paid much attention to the tragedy of the Sultana. Many catastrophes happened quite recently by historical standards. One of them occurred in 2002. The ferry La Joola was a Senegalese vessel. The ferry sailed twice a week, mainly along the coast of Dakar, carrying passengers who traded mango and palm oil. It made daily voyages and never faced severe problems thanks to modern rescue equipment and good repair service. But one day, the ship's crew discovered a malfunction and sent the boat to port. For almost a year, La Joola was in a non-working condition, awaiting repairs. But it didn't get high-quality service. After poor maintenance, the ferry set off on its last voyage. On September 26, 2002, La Joola sailed between southern Senegal and Dakar, and at 11 p.m. headed toward Gambia, where a strong storm began. The wind raised high waves, but this wasn't critical for the large passenger ship unless the number of people on board didn't exceed the established norm. La Joola was supposed to carry about 500 passengers, but had many more people that day. Too many passengers, poor repairs, and a strong storm caused severe problems for the ship. But the main factor in the shipwreck was that La Joola was only built for sailing in coastal waters, but that day, it sailed far from the shore. Big waves started rocking the boat, and at some point, it just turned upside down. The ship's deck went underwater, and its lower part stuck above the surface like an iceberg. All the passengers sitting in cabins fell on the ceiling and lost their orientation in space. There were no holes or damage in the ship's hull, and water flooded the lower decks for a long time. The vessel stood in a twisted position for several hours. Then, the boat began to sink when the water seeped through the deck and hold. The ocean was warm, but no one came to save the passengers. People had to wait almost 4 days to be rescued. Unfortunately, only a few managed to survive. The Philippines is a very dangerous area for ships. This place consists of several thousand islands and a vast area with shallow water. Ships can run aground and damage the hull with reefs and pitfalls. On September 20th, 1987, one of the most terrible disasters in navigation history occurred there. A Philippine passenger ferry called Dona Paz left one of the islands and sailed toward Manila. The sun was shining, the ocean was calm, and the visibility was good. But for some reason, the crew members didn't notice how the tanker Vector was approaching them. The two ships collided at low speed. The collision wasn't strong, but the problem was that the Vector had tons of oil on board, and the Dona Paz crashed into the cargo hold where that oil was stored. So it spilled all over the ocean, and then a spark slipped through. Not only did the two ships catch fire, but also filled with water. Both ships sank in a matter of seconds. Only a few dozen people survived that disaster. On September 27, 1854, the passenger ship Arctic sailed from Liverpool to New York. The fog came rolling down, and visibility got really bad. Another boat appeared out of the thick white haze, the French steamer Vesta. The ships were close enough to each other that a collision was inevitable. The French vessel was smaller, so it seemed to the Arctic's captain that Vesta had received a lot of damage. And while he was staring at the other ship, his boat got quickly filled with water. The captain gave the order to sail to the shore as fast as possible, but the ship's engines stopped working because of the flood. Then the ship's crew started to lower lifeboats with women and kids. Still, when rescuers found lifeboats with people, it turned out that only 87 out of 400 people survived, 65 crew members and 22 passengers. Surprisingly, there were only grown men among them. The ship's captain survived by clinging to the wreckage. All newspapers wrote about this story as one of the most terrible and shameful tragedies in navigation history. The survivors were criticized because they didn't save women and kids, and the crew members were accused of violating the law, since the safety of passengers should be higher than the safety of sailors. But despite this, none of them were brought to responsibility. Unfortunately, shipwrecks still occur to this day, but fortunately, there are fewer of them than before, thanks to modern navigation systems and radar. But no technology can guarantee there won't be a super strong storm or any other emergency that no one can foresee.
In the Titanic movie, you won't see any fumes above the fourth funnel of the legendary ocean liner, and it's not a mistake. Back in 1911, the year before the Dream ship's departure, large ships would mostly sail with 4 chimneys. They needed those to draw heat and fumes from their massive boilers. The Titanic was a real engineering gem that only needed 3 chimneys to function. So the fourth was added for balance and more impressive looks. The White Star Line thought the public would have been disappointed to see only 3 pipes on the greatest ship of all time. The Titanic's sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, also had 1 fake funnel each for the same reason. The dummy chimney wasn't completely useless and served for ventilation. It took out the fumes from the machine spaces in the lower decks and from one of the first-class general rooms. 1 big ventilation funnel, instead of several small ones, helped to declutter the upper decks and left more open space for passengers to enjoy their strolls. When Titanic went down, the funnels, each weighing 60 tons, went down with the rest of the ship. They were made extra tall to make sure the passengers weren't covered in the soot being ejected. Their height and weight let them stay in the upright position. The forward funnel, followed by the others, fell only when the ship went for the final dive. Those chimneys were much lighter than the bow, so they spread among other debris. The light material they were made of flattened once it hit the bottom, and the iron-eating bacteria living deep down took care of it later. The bow of Titanic remained intact when it hit the seabed, but the stern was completely mangled. When the famous ocean liner hit that iceberg, things got really messy. It took the future movie star a whole 2 hours and 40 minutes to submerge completely. The collision let water flood 6 out of 16 watertight compartments. As the water gushed into the starboard side, the ship started to tilt down in the front and a bit to the right. By midnight, the damaged compartments were spilling water into others, and it was chaos because these compartments were only watertight horizontally. Soon enough, water started flooding through the anchor chain holes, and by 2 a.m., the bow was sinking, and the stern's propellers were lifted out of the water. The ship kept flooding until the moment the bow went underwater, and the stern shot up almost 45 degrees. The weight of those massive propellers stressed the ship's midsection. The steel just couldn't handle it and failed. Survivors described that moment as some loud noise, like breaking china or falling gear. That was the Titanic's upper structure giving in. By 12 past 2 a.m., the bow and stern were only connected by the inner bottom structure. Minutes later, the bow, weighing almost 16,000 tons, broke loose from the stern. The stern rose sharply to an almost vertical position and started sinking slowly. By 2:20, it disappeared underwater. The bow was cruising down at about 13 miles per hour and had hit the ocean floor almost a half an hour before the stern. The two parts of the Titanic now lie 2,000 feet apart, pointing in different directions. The bow remained mostly intact, just covered in mud. The stern turned into a tangled wreck because of the implosions it went through during the descent. The air trapped within the structure just couldn't handle the increasing pressure of the water deep down. Signal rockets played a big part in the Titanic's tragedy. When a ship goes down, you're supposed to shoot up red flares to signal trouble. But someone decided to stock Titanic with white lights instead of the usual red ones. So when the ship smacked into that iceberg, the crew fired off white flares. The SS Californian was passing nearby, and his captain knew the Titanic was in a dangerous iceberg zone. The crew didn't spot the sinking Titanic, but they sure saw those white rockets. The radio between the ships was useless because the Californian's operator switched it off. The captain had a gut feeling something was off, so he flashed a Morse code light signal at Titanic. But he received no reply because the Titanic had already gone underwater. There was another ship, Samson, sailing alongside the Titanic. It had plenty of illegally hunted frozen seal meat from Canadian waters abroad, so it was sailing with lights off to remain unnoticed. When they saw the Titanic's white rockets, they thought it was the Coast Guard and zoomed away. Samson didn't have a radio, so they couldn't find out about the ongoing disaster. The crew got the news about Titanic only when they got to the coast of Iceland the following month. There have been many theories to explain the Titanic tragedy, and one of the recent ones says that there was a fire involved. An Irish journalist went full detective for decades, digging into the mystery, and stumbled upon a game-changer. He came across a photo album that had been hiding from the public for a century after the tragedy. In the pictures, taken at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, just over a week before the liner sailed, you can clearly see a massive 30-foot black spot on the ship's hull. Maloney researched the photos and eyewitness testimony from the time and claimed that a fire spontaneously broke out inside of one of Titanic's enormous coal bunkers. It was raging for a whole 3 weeks and messed with the metal, critically weakening a crucial segment of the ship's hull. Back then, most ships had just one hull, so it was the only skin the Titanic had. That's why the iceberg managed to punch a hole through the ship so easily. If it hadn't been for the fire, the Titanic might have shrugged off that iceberg collision. The company operating the liner knew about the fire, but they decided to conceal that fact. They didn't want any negative stories in the press as they faced some serious competition in transatlantic voyages. The Titanic was sold out, so they stocked up on coal and made it sail. The moon might have also played a role in the sinking. Our satellite heavily affects tides on the Earth. The closer it is to our planet, the stronger the tides are because of the increasing gravity of the moon. Back in 1912, The moon was so close, it made several glaciers in Greenland break apart. Massive chunks of ice that broke off from the glaciers started floating south. The supermoon event came just 6 minutes after a spring tide. During new and full moons, the alignment of the moon, the Earth, and the Sun makes their combined gravity reach its peak. And the day before, our planet had come the closest to the Sun that year, which made the gravity even stronger. This mixture of events created perfect conditions for one of the most powerful tides in history. It created the perfect conditions for the icebergs breaking off from Greenland's glaciers to move freely. Opponents of this theory say that the difference in tidal force wasn't actually that big, and it couldn't have been the main cause of the sinking. The iceberg tore down the side of the ship, leaving a huge opening in the hull. It wasn't a continuous rip, and damage was caused in several places. Some experts believe the ship would have survived the iceberg if it had hit head-on. The Titanic had watertight compartments designed to prevent flooding in case of a collision. Only the first 3 or 4 of these compartments would have been flooded. This could have helped save a lot of lives. Supporters of this theory put the blame for the disaster on First Officer William Murdoch. Huge, fast-moving ships don't just turn in a matter of seconds like a speeding car. It takes minutes. When Murdoch realized the collision was inevitable, he tried dodging left to avoid a direct hit. But despite his efforts, the ship still collided with the iceberg. You know the rest.
It has recently become a popular location for many tourists looking for the perfect place to get away from it all. If you're lucky enough to catch a sunny day here, it's like no other, I can assure you. Chances are, you'll end up having loads of foggy days, but let's be honest, they have a special allure of their own. This enchanting smile-shaped island is called Sable Island. It's located 190 miles from mainland Nova Scotia. It wasn't accessible to the general public until 2013. That's when it was added to the list of National Parks of Canada. You can get here either by plane or by water. But what's so enchanting about this place anyway? There must be something since the yearly tourist count is growing every year. Firstly, there's a spectacular number of wild horses here. There are between 200 and 500 horses roaming free all over the island. There's also a large population of gray seals. The place is also the only breeding location of a rare bird species called the Ipswich sparrow. If you're already considering a trip here, there are some things you need to know first. Remember that fog I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that Sable Island is the foggiest place in the Canadian Maritimes. I'm talking about approximately 127 foggy days each year. During such days, Sable Island literally disappears underneath a thick layer of fog. You won't be able to explore the place on your own either. The local regulations state that visitors need to travel within a group, and they also need to keep a 197-foot distance from the wildlife they can encounter here. As charming as this place may be, it holds a dark secret hidden beneath the sandy dunes, and it has nothing to do with beautiful creatures living here or the island's unique vegetation. Apart from being known from its horses and seals, Sable Island is infamous for an overwhelming number of shipwrecks. Over the years, about 350 ships have ended their lives here, on these sandbars. When survivors described their experiences, they usually mentioned harsh weather conditions near this mysterious island. The island also made its way into literature when it was described in a book called The Perfect Storm, which was written by Sebastian Junger and published in 1997. The book was so successful that it was later adapted for the big screen in 2000, with George Clooney playing the leading role. The first recorded shipwreck near Sable Island dates back to 1583. The boat was named the HMS Delight and was under the command of British adventurer and explorer Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Only 17 people managed to survive the catastrophe by escaping in a small boat. Records mention that they spent 7 days at sea before reaching the shores of Newfoundland. In 1884, another vessel named the Nicosia struggled in the thick fog as well. The ship was completely destroyed, but fortunately, all 18 crew members managed to survive. The captain's son was almost lost at sea when a lifeboat capsized when he was climbing into it. he somehow managed to stay underneath the lifeboat, which was completely submerged. When this lifeboat righted, he eventually emerged from the water and was rescued for the second time. The years between 1947 and 1999 were relatively quiet on the island. In 1999, though, a yacht called the Merrimack ran aground near the shore of the island at about 2 a.m. on July 27th. The 40-foot fiberglass boat had a crew of only 3 people. Natural gas exploration workers, who were luckily not far away, rescued them. The crew managed to fly safely to Halifax the next day. The owner of the Merrimack tried to recover his boat by hiring local fishermen. Unfortunately, this operation was unsuccessful, since only the fittings of the yacht were eventually saved. It took no more than 6 weeks for the sand and waves to crush and completely break up the hull of the Merrimack. So what is it about this place that's so dangerous for boats? Does it have anything to do with the weather? Or maybe there's other forces at play? The explanation turns out to be a bit more complex, and it wasn't easy to figure out, at least not way back in the 1500s. First of all, the island is located close to one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Since it's also near one of the major shipping routes between Europe and North America, hundreds of vessels sail past it each year. The likelihood of shipwreck increases when there are so many boats roaming around the area. Sable Island is also in the way of most of the storms that move up the Atlantic coast of North America. It's no surprise that boats often get hurtled straight onto the shores of this island. The weather has a lot to do with it too. During the summer season, the warm air from the Gulf Stream creates a dense fog as it merges with the cool air by the Labrador Current that passes by the island. Other currents don't help the matter. Sable Island is next to the meeting point of 3 major ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the Labrador Current, and the Belle Isle Current. Since the 1950s, radars and other modern navigation tools have been used on commercial vessels as well. Up until then, the sextant was the main instrument used to figure out a ship's location. It doesn't mean that sextants weren't accurate, but this instrument couldn't work properly without a clear view of the sun or stars, which means it didn't help much in dense fog, such as the one surrounding Sable Island, or when it was cloudy. Often during bad weather, the captain of a ship navigated, relying on their experiences and intuition based on the ship's speed and direction. That's why most of the survivors in shipwrecks near Sable Island said that the captain had simply miscalculated the ship's position, crashing into Sable Island by accident. This dusty, sandy land is as unfriendly to ships as it is to trees. There's reportedly a single tree on the whole island, and it looks a lot more like a bush. It's actually a pine tree. And since the famous island horses don't see it as much of a food source, it somehow managed to survive. Reports say that the tree was planted back in the 1950s. Local authorities were trying to grow a forest on the island to make it a bit more welcoming. They've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years, more than 69,000 evergreens, 600 fruit trees, and about 55 pounds of pine seeds, along with other plants which could survive the conditions on the island. But they were no match for the extreme weather and sandy soil. Out of all those plants, just one pine tree is still alive. Thanks to its resistance, it has even become a symbol of Sable Island. Interestingly, for around 40 years, the island also had just one inhabitant. Can you imagine that? One person living on a remote island for so many decades? It's the story of a woman called Zoe Lucas. She chose to surround herself with the only residents on the island: the horses, the gray seals, and the many species of birds. An esteemed naturalist, she mentioned in an interview she gave back in 2017 that she was used to living on the island and that she never got lonely. To survive here, she had to put together an essentials kit. It included a notebook to take notes and a pair of binoculars to study the wildlife. You can safely assume she wasn't scared of the intimidating surroundings, since she decided to eventually call this place home. At first, Zoe wanted to set up camp on one end of the island, near some abandoned buildings. But eventually, she settled in a wooden house near a bunch of sand dunes. A Canadian institution called the Meteorological Service of Canada put together the simple construction back in the 1940s. Parks Canada operates the building these days. Zoe's work included gathering as much data on the local horse population as possible. It could help scientists better understand how they managed to adapt to the unfriendly environment. She also helped gather the debris that made it to the shore to help track pollution levels. Among all the rubbish that she collected, there was a refrigerator and a crate full of fresh peppers. Some other specialists eventually started working rotating shifts on Sable Island to offer the brave woman a little bit of company now and then.
Far out in the open sea on a perfectly calm day, a dot appears on the horizon. It grows in size as it gets closer, and soon you can see it's a ship. But when you look at it through the spyglass, chills go down your spine. The vessel is in perfect condition and its cargo is on board, but it's completely devoid of people, drifting listlessly along the current. That was what the captain of the Ellen Austin saw in 1881, and what brought his crew so many sorrows. In December of the previous year, the Ellen Austin, a big 210-foot-long ship, left the port of Liverpool to make its trip to New York. The ship was carrying a load of people hoping to find a better life in the New World. Captain A.J. Griffin took the vessel due southwest for a shorter voyage, and a few weeks into 1881, they found themselves north of the Sargasso Sea, known for its lack of winds and strong circling currents. Ships that got caught in those could lose control and keep on drifting in circles until they were dragged into the center. From there, they'd be incredibly lucky to get back past the currents, but more often than not, they stayed in the desolate desert of the sea forever. Worse still, the area belonged to the notorious Bermuda Triangle, which was already known to take down ships and make them disappear without a trace. The ship's crew were nervous, afraid of being in such a dangerous area so close to a sea that could bring them to a standstill. And ominously, some of the Sargasso Sea's calm must have escaped it, because the Ellen Austin lost its speed one day and fell adrift without the winds. It was fine, though. They had ample provisions and were still on schedule. Captain Griffin was walking around his ship, giving orders in a voice full of calm authority, and both his crew and passengers trusted him completely. But then, the lookout shouted from above that a ship was in sight. And indeed, when the captain looked in the direction the man was pointing, he saw a small schooner moving slowly into view and towards the Ellen Austin. As it came closer, it became apparent that the way the strange vessel moved wasn't right. The captain frowned and examined it through his spyglass. The schooner was untouched, but eerily silent. There wasn't a single soul on board. Derelict ships weren't that rare in the Atlantic at the time, but neither were pirates. Captain Griffin decided to wait and watch. After 2 days, the schooner was as quiet as always, and Captain finally thought it was fine to move in. He took a small team of sailors and boarded the stranded ship. There was nobody there indeed, but luck seemed to be on Griffin's side. The precious cargo of mahogany wood was still in the holds. The captain returned to the Ellen Austin and ordered his select men to take the smaller ship along to New York. The crew's spirits arose with the prospect of riches awaiting them upon arrival. When the winds blew strong again, the Ellen Austin continued its voyage, with the unnamed vessel tagging along. But after a couple of days, the ships were caught in a powerful storm and got separated. The wind, rain, and waves beat them for several days in a row. When the weather finally cleared, Captain Griffin ordered to find the schooner. They searched for another day until they finally found it adrift, way off the course. Griffin hailed his men on board the smaller ship, but no one answered. A party of sailors went to investigate and returned with their faces white with fear. The whole prize crew went missing in the storm. The captain wasn't one to lose such a valuable find, though, and ordered another team to take control of the schooner. Reluctantly, the sailors obeyed, and the two ships continued their voyage. They agreed to stay as close as possible to one another and ring their bells at set intervals at night to let each other know they were fine. Several nights went all right, with bells ringing reassuringly every hour. But one day, a thick blanket of fog fell on the sea and almost completely blocked their vision. The ships went on regardless and started sounding their bells earlier. When night came, the fog was still there, but the bells were the sound of life. Until they stopped. Captain Griffin rang the bell once, then twice. No answer. The crew lit the fires and looked out into the sea intently, but the fog hadn't lifted, and they couldn't see a thing in the swirling abyss beyond the ship's board. Nobody could sleep that night, and they waited in silence until the break of dawn. The first rays of sun made the fog slowly disperse, and the whole crew went to the edge of the deck with heavy hearts. There was still hope in them, until the last strands of the mist went away, revealing a vast, calm, and most importantly, empty ocean. The nameless schooner was gone, and so was the second team of the Ellen Austin sailors. The ship sailed the rest of the way to New York in grave silence. Once it arrived at the port, the passengers were only too happy to leave the vessel, and no one so much as turned their head as a goodbye. That was the ship's last voyage as the Ellen Austin. That same year, it was sold to a German shipping company and renamed Meta. No one ever found the derelict schooner or the sailors that went missing with it. And that would probably be the end of this mysterious and unresolved story, if it held at least a little bit of the truth. In reality, none of the enigmatic things in the narrative actually happened. The Ellen Austin did indeed leave Liverpool and headed southwest to New York, and its captain was really A.J. Griffin, taking people to the American continent. But from here, the story falls apart. First of all, the ship went way too far to the north to pass the Sargasso Sea so closely. There was simply no reason to make a detour so broad. Even though the westerly winds were strong, it was still faster to take them head-on than to go in a southerly direction. So the Ellen Austin was probably nowhere near the Sargasso Sea and the Bermuda Triangle. Secondly, the triangle itself has been proven time and again to be nothing but a work of fiction. In fact, it gained popularity in the middle of the 20th century, while nobody even thought of drawing a triangle in the Bermuda area before that. The mystery was popularized by science fiction writers and became a common myth, while no serious research proved it any more dangerous than other parts of the world's ocean. So the crew of the Ellen Austin weren't even aware of the Bermuda Triangle back then, let alone afraid of it. Thirdly, the whole story was told and retold by magazines and mystery-loving personalities with ever-changing details. It first appeared in a newspaper in 1906 and already had the date wrong. The article said the voyage took place in 1891 instead of 1881. Later, the story resurfaced in 1935 on the radio with the wrong name of the captain. It was Baker, not Griffin. The date was also off, saying the trip was taken in August 1881, when the Ellen Austin was already renamed Meta. The legend grew upon with other strange details, such as the ship's route from London to Newfoundland, which was never the case. But the final debunking came from the archives of Lloyd's of London, the marine insurance market that keeps all logs of trade and emigration ship routes. The documents there say that on February 1881, the Ellen Austin completed its cross-Atlantic voyage to New York without incident. Captain A.J. Griffin off-boarded the ship with all his crew hale and hearty and declared no loss of hands during the trip. The voyage took over 2 months because the ship had to fight strong westerly winds pushing it back towards Britain. The crew reported no strange encounters on the way, and the whole thing was as boring as could be. And even the passengers must have been smiling when they stepped on the American soil at last, unaware of the phony baloney story they were about to be a part of.
At the beginning of the 20th century, somewhere off the coast of West Africa, a German steamship was leaving the port. Suddenly, the weather got worse, and the vessel entered a thick fog. The sailors ran aground on a sandbank close to the shore. Luckily, no one was hurt, and they were even able to save their precious cargo. But the ship was stuck in the sand for good. And it was not alone there. Nearly the entire length of the western coast of Namibia is called Skeleton Coast. If the name sounds scary, that's because it is. This 976-mile-long beach line is among the most dangerous places on Earth. The local Bushman tribes believe that their supreme deity made this land when it was angry. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to set foot in Namibia in the 15th century. And yep, they didn't like Skeleton Coast either. Portuguese explorers thought this land presented the gates to the underworld. This is the place where the Namib Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean. It might be dangerous, but it's actually beautiful. Plus, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If Skeleton Coast had a PR manager, they would quit on the first day on the job. The area is not exactly tourist-friendly because of its geography and history. Beneath the sand and the waves, there is a secret ocean currently lurking for unsuspecting sailors. It's called Benguela Current. It flows towards the north along the coast of southern Africa. This part of the Atlantic is rich in marine life, but the current's land neighbor isn't that happy with the deal. This arid climate created the Namib Desert, one of the driest regions on Earth. And that marine life I just mentioned? It's sharks. 11 species of them to be exact. And yes, the great white decides to pop by once in a while. So far, we've got a desert landscape, strong currents, and sharks. Not a place for a beachside resort, definitely. But if someone ends up on Skeleton Coast, will they know they're in danger? Don't worry, they will. The beach is littered with wrecks of all sizes and shapes. If you remember that German ship I mentioned in the very beginning, its massive and rusted stern is now sticking out from the desert sand. There are some 500 wrecks in total scattered along the coast, and it's a mixed crowd, from Portuguese galleons centuries old to ships that ran ashore here in the 21st century. A modern fishing ship called Zela India managed to slip from its tow rope in 2008 and ended up on Skeleton Coast. Okay, it didn't escape on its own, it had some help from the elements. But it's better to be a tourist attraction on a beach than to be broken up for scrap. That's where the trawler was originally going, poor thing. Skeleton Coast's most famous inhabitant, to call it such a place, is the wreck of the Dunedin Star. The British cargo liner ran aground here in 1942. The massive rescue operation that followed reveals why it's so dangerous for sailors to end up here. The rescuers managed to save all of the crew and passengers, but at a heavy price. An aircraft and a tugboat were lost in the process. It took the last of the rescuers a full 2 months to return home to Cape Town. Why, you might wonder? One look at the map of the region reveals the reason. It's an endless sea of yellow, which is the sand. There are so few roads here, so Skeleton Coast is hard to reach by land. There are also legal obstacles. You need a special permit to drive into the area. But the skeletons in the name of the area don't only refer to ships, they also stand for animal bones. Most of these belong to whales and seals. Many animals have adapted to the area, so lions and hyenas roam the coastline in search of a meal. Yeah, now there are hungry lions as well, as if those sharks weren't enough. Other animals with a temporary residence on Skeleton Coast include elephants, cheetahs, leopards, and giraffes. In 1971, the Namibian authorities established a national park here, but except for surfers, after an adrenaline rush, they don't get many visitors. You can understand why. The Namib Desert is the oldest desert in the world, and it's not very tourist-friendly either. Those who travel to the region should pack sunscreen and a warm winter jacket. A weird combo, right? Well, not so much when you think that during the day, temperatures soar over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, the air temperature drops below freezing. What a climate roller coaster! And that's not the final danger. Yep, there's more. Remember how that German ship got lost in thick fog? Yeah, it wasn't a one-off event. Because of the region's climate, fog shows up frequently. Sailors should cover their ears now, but this fog is actually good for wildlife. This is their only source of water in the Namib Desert. Reptiles and mammals have adapted to the harsh climate. They use as little water as possible. Shifting sands, thick fog, strong currents, lions, and sharks. Not the stuff you would put in a tourist booklet, but Skeleton Coast isn't the only beach on Earth you wouldn't want to spend your vacation on. I will take you to Cape Tribulation in Australia. The area covers some 48 square miles in the northwestern part of the continent. And no, the area is not as dry as Skeleton Coast. It's part of the Daintree rainforest. You could say that here, it is the rainforest, not the desert that meets the ocean. The beach at Cape Tribulation is straight from a postcard. But looks can be deceiving. Australia? Probably sharks. No, crocodiles are out here to get you if you decide to go for a dip in the sea. There are saltwater crocodiles that the locals call salties. Well, that's a cute nickname for such a dangerous reptile. And it's not just that. The wildlife seems to have a beef with visitors. From October to June, the waters around Cape Tribulation are full of box jellyfish. Their venom affects the human cardiovascular system. When touched by a jellyfish out at sea, swimmers won't have enough time to reach land for help. Vinegar helps neutralize the sting, so you might want to keep a spare bottle in your luggage. Crocodiles and jellyfish sound dangerous, but there's one more animal you should look after. It's the wild boar. It might sound funny, but you won't laugh when you're being chased by one of these across the beach. 21 million wild boars live in Australia. They're mostly active at night, making it even more dangerous if they charge at you. The best defense is running in circles. Wild boars can't cut corners well. That's probably why we don't see many of them taking up careers as race drivers. Cape Tribulation has one last danger installed for you, and it's not an animal. Out here, even the trees are plotting against visitors. The stinging tree got its name for a reason. If you try to pick one of its beautiful red berries, it'll fight back. Its prickles are like tiny glass shards. The less than pleasant effect on your skin will last for a month. Then there is this wait a while bush. Who keeps naming them like this? This long vine has spikes that grab hold and just don't let go. They are so strong they can pull a human off a horse. You'll have to wait for someone to come by and save you from this thorny grabber. If you are about to cross this Australian beach from the vacation list, hold on for a second. Tourism is booming here. The local authorities have restricted access to all of the danger zones. Visitors go swimming in dreamy water holes that are surrounded by lush vegetation. There are even ropes to swing from. Now, that's a beach you can finally relax on. Thick fog is rising over the ocean as the sun is slowly sinking towards the horizon. It's hard to see further away than a few dozen feet, but that's enough to notice a hulking, skeletal shape in the distance. As your ship approaches the figure, your heart beats faster, and then you make out the details of another vessel, abandoned by the looks of it. Ghost ships do exist, and their mysteries aren't always solved. Take MV Joyita, for example. It was a wooden vessel built in 1931 as a luxury yacht. It had served well to various people over 20 years before it was bought by a Samoan sailor and became a merchant ship. In 1955, though, Joyita's service came to an abrupt and mysterious end. On October 3rd, it set sail for another trading voyage that should have taken no more than 48 hours. Delays happen in the sea, so when Joyita didn't arrive on October 5th as scheduled, there was little worry yet. But then it failed to come on the following day too. There was no distress signal or any other sign of Joyita's presence anywhere between its departure and arrival points. A search and rescue party was dispatched to find the ship, and for 6 days, they were scouting the area of nearly 100,000 square miles. On October 12th, the mission returned to the base empty-handed. Joyita vanished without a trace. It was only a month later that another merchant ship, Tuvalu, noticed the missing vessel far away from its route, drifting in the open sea and listing heavily. The sailors boarded the ship and found that all of its crew and passengers, 25 people total, were missing, along with all the cargo the vessel had been carrying. The radio was tuned to the International Distress Channel, meaning that the crew had been trying to ask for help, but they couldn't reach anyone because the radio cable had been damaged, limiting the range to 2 miles. The lifeboats were missing as well, indicating that people on board must have left the ship. Unfortunately, they seem to have taken the logbook with them, leaving the rescue team clueless as to what had happened. Even today, the mystery of MV Joyita hasn't been solved yet. No one knows where the crew and passengers had gone and what had caused them to leave. SV Carol A. Deering wasn't a ghost ship in the usual sense of the word. There are no sightings of it in the open sea. Instead, it was found on the shore, but the circumstances of it running aground are a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Carol A. Deering was built in 1919 in Maine, and it was a large vessel made for commercial voyages. Unfortunately, despite its large cost of construction, it had only served for a year before its last trip. July 19, 1920. The ship was traveling from Puerto Rico to Rio de Janeiro via Newport News to deliver a cargo of coal. It was almost halfway to the final destination when the captain fell seriously ill, and the crew turned back to drop him and his son off and replace the captain. The voyage went without incident, but when it came to Barbados in December to resupply, there were strange moods among the crew. The first mate didn't seem to be happy with the new captain. No one paid much attention to it back then, when they probably should have. The last sighting of Carol A. Deering at sea was on January 28, 1921, when a lightship noticed it off the coast of North Carolina. There was some commotion on the quarterdeck of the ship, where the crew were normally not allowed. Then, another vessel sighted it, but there was already no one on the decks. On January 31st, the merchant ship was found hard aground in the Diamond Shoals, a site notorious for numerous shipwrecks that had been occupying there for centuries. When the search and rescue party boarded the ship, they found it abandoned, the log and personal belongings of the crew gone, along with the 2 lifeboats. There is still no answer to what happened on board of Carol A. Deering that January, although the most popular version was mutiny. Maybe we'll never find out the truth though. SS Baychimo is perhaps one of the most notable ghost ships in history. This large cargo steamer was built in 1914 in Sweden and plodded its way dutifully over 16 years, trading provisions for pelts with native tribes of Alaska and Canada. But then, on October 1st, 1931, Baychimo got caught in pack ice. At first, it seemed the crew would be able to wait it out and continue on their route because the ship broke free in a couple of days. But in less than a week, it became caught again, this time for good. In another week, a rescue party was sent to fetch 22 of the Baychimo's crew, while another 15 remained behind to wait through the winter if necessary and get the ship back. But a month later, after a powerful blizzard struck their camp, the sailors went out of their shelters only to find the ship gone. Luckily, a few days later, a native hunter told them Baychimo hadn't been lost yet. He'd seen it about 45 miles from where they had been stationed. They managed to track it down, but decided the ship wouldn't survive the winter. So they took the most valuable cargo from its hold and abandoned it. They were wrong though. SS Baychimo did survive that winter, and many more that followed. When the ice broke, it sailed away on its own, drifting listlessly along the shores of Canada and Alaska. There were numerous sightings of the ghost ship, sometimes adrift in the open sea, and at other times stuck in the pack ice again. People attempted to board and salvage it, but weather conditions or lack of equipment always prevented them. SS Baychimo was last sighted by native Alaskans in 1969, 38 years after its abandonment. What became of it later remains unknown. The story of SS Orang Medan is one of the most puzzling and harrowing ghost ship stories of the 20th century. No one even knows for sure if the ship even existed in the first place. It wasn't recorded in Lloyd's Shipping, the International Register of Ships, which makes it either a tall tale or a vessel that avoided being officially recognized for some shady reasons. In any case, the accounts as to what happened to the Medan vary. According to most reports, it was carrying some unknown cargo in the Indonesian waters when a distress call was received by another ship in the vicinity. The officer on duty heard an SOS message, but its contents are different depending on the accounts. The message did not repeat, and the crew of Medan didn't answer to any attempts to contact it back. The ship that received the distress call hurried to the rescue, but they only reached the vessel the following day, when it was already drifting and slightly listing. When the rescuers boarded the ship, they found that none of the crew had survived. However, one lifeboat was missing, which implied that there was at least one crew member who managed to escape. What happened to the rest of the people on board remains a mystery to this day. Still, there are no hard facts about this story, so we might never find out whether SS Orang Medan was actually a ship and not a thing of fiction. SV Zabrina was a 3-mast sailing barge built in 1873 for river trade ships in South America. She served for well over 4 decades, proving to be a sturdy and reliable ship. It was later transferred to Europe, where it continued serving its purpose well. But then, in October 1917, Zabrina set sail on a regular voyage only to be found ashore several days later. Mysteriously, although the ship was perfectly intact, the entire crew of 5 and the captain were gone. There is no direct evidence or hard facts as to what really happened that day. The most convincing theory is that the crew were washed away from the deck because of an underwater explosion. And then the ship sailed ahead without them, but the truth, as always, remains unknown.
The moon shines brightly and illuminates the black water of the ocean. Thick fog descends on it in ominous silence. Then, it's suddenly broken by the creaking of wooden boards, followed by a rippling of the waves. Through the fog, you see the outline of an old, large ship. Its hull is rusty, and a strange cold is coming from it. But the most unsettling thing is that there's no one on the deck. The ship sails without a crew. No, this isn't a mythical Flying Dutchman, but a very real ghost ship. September 2nd, 2019. The British Royal Navy's ice patrol ship, called the HMS Protector, sails through the calm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The time is 11 p.m. Some of the ship's crew are on deck, while others are sleeping in their cabins. The captain steers the ship and looks straight at the horizon. The sky is lit up by an orange twilight, and clouds float in the distance. Suddenly, against this beautiful landscape, one of the sailors notices the black silhouette of an unknown ship. The captain slows down and steers the ship a little closer to the mysterious vessel. This is an old cargo ship, 250 feet long. Attempts to contact the crew members lead to nothing. It seems the unknown boat is floating in the ocean by itself. There's no one on board, at least, no one alive. The deck of the ship creaks from rocking on the waves. The sun sinks below the horizon, and it gets dark. The ship looks terrifying. British sailors don't dare to climb on that strange deck. They take a photo, post it on the internet, and sail away. Many people on the internet will assume the sailors met a real ghost ship. 5 months later, we're in the village of Ballycotton in County Cork, Ireland. A local leaves the house early in the morning to go for a daily run. Music in his headphones, fresh cool air, and a scenic route are ideal conditions for a good workout. The jogger runs along the road on the coast of the Celtic Sea. There was a strong storm last night, and now the sea looks calm. The man runs along the top of a low cliff and notices a huge vessel. An old rusty cargo ship 250 feet long lies on the beach, right among the rocks. No people on board. It seems the ship has been here for ages, but the local is sure this vessel wasn't here yesterday. A little later, it turns out this is the same ship that the sailors from the HMS Protector saw 5 months ago, thousands of miles from this place. The cargo ship, called the Alta, was built in 1976. Nobody knows who used it all this time and for what purposes. It's only known that in 2017, the ship was purchased by a new owner and marked with the flag of Tanzania. It's important to say that almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is needed to track ship movements in the ocean. Since 2015, something strange started happening with the Alta's AIS. The ship disappeared from the satellites, then reappeared again. Over the past few years, this ship had changed several names and flags. It's not surprising that its AIS shut off and turned on numerous times. It's said that some of those who disable AIS on their ships do so to hide outlaw activities. The ship's captain, whoever it was, clearly didn't want to show the Alta's movements. As AIS showed in 2017, the ship had sailed near Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such cities in different parts of Greece. Then, the AIS signal disappeared, and 10 months later, the Alta reappeared near the northern coast of Africa, 1,200 miles from Greece. In September of 2018, the ship was sailing about 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, and at that time, the crew members started having problems. There were 10 people on board the Alta. On September 19th, the ship's engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest shore was very far away. The ship began to drift. As days passed, the crew couldn't fix the vessel. Food supplies were running low. The crew started to panic and tried to contact someone. The situation got worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. Crew members contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. On October 2nd, a helicopter headed towards the ship. Food and water were unloaded on the Alta. This was enough for the crew to bide their time for several days. About a week later, a rescue boat sailed about 1,500 miles to reach the Alta and help the stranded sailors. Shortly before the start of the hurricane, American rescuers succeeded. The entire crew of the wrecked ship was taken to Puerto Rico. The Alta remained drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship arrived to tow it to the coast of Guyana. Then, something went wrong, again. The ship was hijacked. Who did it and why remains a mystery to this day. But then, for some unknown reason, the thieves decided to abandon the ship and left it to drift in the ocean. For almost a year, the ship's location couldn't be tracked. Then, in September 2019, the vessel was found by the British Royal Navy. How the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland is unknown. An investigation has been launched in Ireland. It's necessary to identify the owner of the vessel and find a responsible person to take on the task of towing it. But no one has since been found. Once, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the owner of the ship, but didn't provide any evidence. Several barrels of oil were found on board the Alta. To dismantle the ship, the Irish authorities will need to spend about 10 million euros. Local residents are annoyed by the wreck too. Corroding metal is bad for the environment, and kids have already snuck on board and posted a video on the internet from inside the abandoned ship. The further fate of the Alta remains unresolved. It's still lying there. That ship sailed in the ocean for just 2 years. Now imagine if some other managed to drift for 38. In all that time, no one could catch this ship, and people still seek it. That vessel is called the SS Baychimo. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got stuck in ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The team waited a week for it to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, the weather improved a bit, and part of the team was evacuated to the nearest city. Another part of the crew, with the captain, set up camp near the ship. The storm started again and didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so heavy that the ship's captain couldn't see beyond his arm's reach. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain saw that the ship simply vanished. He decided the Baychimo sank during the storm. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. The hull of the ship was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the ship. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was drifting at various points along the Alaskan coast. Several times, people climbed on the ship, including native Alaskan residents and a group of researchers. Attempts to save the vessel from the sea ended in failure. The salvage operations were hampered by drifting ice and bad weather. The last time it was seen was in 1969. The ship was frozen and blocked by the ice. In 2006, the government created a special project to find the Baychimo. However, in all these years, the ship still hasn't been found. Its fate is unknown. It's likely that the ship has finally found peace and is now lying on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea.
There's something really bizarre going on at these 12 points scattered across the Earth. The vile vortices, as they're called, are these creepy spots over the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, and the North and South Poles, where weird forces seem to take over. You've probably heard of the most famous one, the Bermuda Triangle. It's believed that more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes have mysteriously disappeared in this area, which is located between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. But what most people don't realize is that the Bermuda Triangle actually has 11 siblings, and these other spots can be even more terrifying. Let's start with Mohenjo-Daro. This was a thriving city located in what is now Pakistan. Built around 2500 before the Common Era, this urban center was once home to about 40,000 people. But then, suddenly, people abandoned it by the year 1700 before the Common Era. In the 1940s, an archaeologist discovered 39 human skeletons at the site, which fueled the theory that the city was invaded by some other civilization at some point. But honestly, it's hard to confirm that, since archaeology doesn't really explain the city's sudden destruction or the disappearance of its people. It's led to a bunch of bizarre theories. One of them talks about an ancient extraterrestrial race that might have lived there, and a malevolent wind that swept through the city. Another ancient city with a similar mystery is the Great Zimbabwe. Its construction began in the 11th century, and at its peak it housed up to 18,000 people. But for reasons we'll probably never fully understand, it was abandoned in the 15th century. Archaeologists were really interested in this place, and that's when things got even weirder. They found 8 of these birds, now called the Zimbabwe birds. These soapstone sculptures were found sitting on stone columns that were over 90 centimeters tall. Nothing like them has ever been found anywhere else, and their meaning is still a total mystery. Some think each bird represents a new king, but other theories suggest they were ancient animals very dear to the people who lived there. Adding to the mystery, local legends talk about a strange, short man who's sometimes seen wandering around, but he always disappears before anyone can get close. Then there's Easter Island, another one of the 12 vile vortices. It's located in the eastern Pacific Ocean, and it's famous for its nearly 1,000 enormous statues called moai. We still don't know what they mean, or how they were made. Some of them are almost 30 feet tall and weigh as much as 80 tons. Today, it wouldn't be that tough to move and carve these statues, but we're talking about a period between the years 1100 and 1680. So nobody really knows how they did it. Some specialists believe these statues were carried across the island, while others think they were pushed on log rollers. But the most bizarre theories suggest extraterrestrials were involved. Algeria is another land rich in ancient mysteries, and one of the most fascinating is something called the Jeddars. These are 13 monuments with square stone bases and angular mounds, built between the 4th and 7th centuries. But the weird part is, no one knows their purpose. One of them had an inscription in Latin, but it was so worn down that the message was nearly impossible to read. The best guess so far is that these monuments were probably tombs for royalty, although no one knows exactly who was supposed to be buried there. What we do know is that there are many myths related to strange disappearances in the region. The next mysterious spot is located south of Tokyo in the Pacific Ocean, and it's called the Dragon's Triangle. Does that name ring a bell? Yep. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, this area is known for strange disappearances of airplanes and ships. One of the most chilling stories dates back to 1945, when a plane allegedly vanished. The pilot supposedly sent a radio transmission right before the aircraft disappeared, claiming that something strange was happening in the sky, like it was opening up or something. While this story is definitely eerie, the truth behind it and many other Dragon's Triangle legends is still up for debate. If you type Hamakulia volcano into Google Earth, you'll find it located in Hawaii's Ring of Fire. But this place is so shrouded in mystery that it's hard to find much information about it. Some legends speak of unusual electrical energy being detected in the area, and there's even a story about an eyewitness who claimed to see a plane flying over it totally disappear from the radar. Another eerie spot is the South Atlantic Anomaly, which is an area on Earth where natural radiation flows out of control. While this doesn't affect our daily lives on the surface, it has a pretty big impact on Earth's atmosphere. The radiation there is so intense that it can knock out the onboard computers of spacecraft and interfere with the data collected by satellites passing through the area. To deal with this, specialists had to add an additional shield to the International Space Station. The South Atlantic Anomaly is also linked to a weird event that astronauts experience called cosmic ray visual phenomena. They've reported seeing random flashes of light or shooting stars out there in space, but it's all just some kind of illusion. From wild radiation to strange seismic activity. The Wharton Basin in the Indian Ocean is a place known for unusual tectonic events. In April of 2012, a massive earthquake measuring magnitude 8.6 hit the region. This was considered the largest intraplate earthquake ever recorded, meaning it happened within a tectonic plate rather than at its boundary. This caught the attention of scientists, who now speculate that the region might be forming a new boundary between the Australian and Indian plates. But for now, this is all still one big mystery. Now let's head to the Pacific Ocean. More specifically, to the New Hebrides Trench. This submarine trench is about 750 miles long and 45 miles wide. It formed when the Australian plate slid under the New Hebrides plate. There's no doubt that this is one of the creepiest and deepest spots in the ocean. The danger isn't just down in the deep sea either, as this trench has been connected to several earthquakes that affected New Caledonia and Vanuatu. This area also has some strange features. For example, when scientists explored it, they didn't find a single grenadier fish down there. This type of fish is one of the most common deep-sea creatures you would expect to see in trenches around the Pacific. So why aren't they around the New Hebrides Trench? Maybe they know something we don't. The two remaining vile vortices are the North and South Poles. These two are on the opposite ends of the planet, but they share one thing in common: strange disappearances. One of the most famous stories from the North Pole happened in 1897. 3 brave explorers set out on a journey to reach the North Pole using a hot air balloon. But they never completed their mission. Their mysterious disappearance remains one of the most intriguing, unsolved mysteries in the history of Arctic exploration. The South Pole is also known for similar mysteries. It's believed that hundreds of people may be buried beneath the snow and ice of the coldest continent on Earth. Even with all the advancements in technology and knowledge, the South Pole can still be extremely dangerous for anyone who ventures there. The temperatures can drop to almost minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and the winds can get up to 200 miles per hour. And that's definitely enough reason to stay away. Now that you're familiar with the 12 vile vortices, let me tell you something even stranger. If you look at a map, you'll see that these places are arranged in a way that looks pretty similar across the globe. Here's the weird part. If you connect these spots where unexplained events have occurred, you actually form the geometric shape of an icosahedron. This could be just a huge coincidence, but the fact that these mystery spots align with this shape makes them even more intriguing.
The voyage started just like any other. The cargo ship SS Cotopaxi is making another journey to Havana, Cuba to deliver coal. It's November 29, 1925. For Captain Meyer and his crew, leaving Charleston Port, South Carolina, it will be the last trip the ship ever makes. Its route ran through the Bermuda Triangle. 2 days into the trip, the Cotopaxi sent out a distress signal. It had got caught up in a strong tropical storm and turned over on its side. The wind was very strong and there was powerful lightning as well. Rain gradually filled the ship's hold. Then there was a bright white flash, and the ship disappeared without a trace. Later, its wreckage was found in the Gobi Desert, which is in a completely different part of the world. All 32 crew members, including the captain, were missing. Of course, the part about the Gobi Desert is fictional. For one of his movies, Steven Spielberg came up with the idea that the ship was moved there by aliens. Still, in real life, the ship was never found, and its crew really did disappear. It was officially declared missing a month afterward, and nobody could find the wreck. It seems like a classic case of mysterious things going on in the Bermuda Triangle. But most mysteries are solved sooner or later. In 2020, the Cotopaxi was found. A man named Michael Barnett had moved to Florida to study shipwrecks off the coast. One wreck in particular really caught his attention. It was much larger than the others, and the locals called it the Bear Wreck. It was about 40 miles from St. Augustine in northern Florida, but no one had ever managed to identify the rusty hull. So Michael started to do some detective work. He measured the size of the shipwreck and started working through all the information he could find. He researched hundreds of old newspapers, leafed through insurance records, and looked at artifacts found on the wreck. After hundreds of hours of hard work, Michael was sure it was the Cotopaxi. But a few years before, there had been a rumor that the same ship had been found off the coast of Cuba. The Coast Guard found the wreck of a cargo ship about the same size that looked a lot like the one lost in 1925. Michael was sure they were wrong, so he teamed up with some science journalists and kept investigating. Soon they discovered something that seemed to confirm Michael's belief. Divers found brass valves with the letters SV on them in the wreckage of the ship. Michael suggested these initials referred to Scott Valve Manufacturing Company. The headquarters of this company was in Michigan, not far from where the Cotopaxi had been built. The company had probably supplied parts for the Cotopaxi. So the puzzle seemed to be solved. The Bear Wreck was really the missing cargo ship. But Michael still needed to work out why the ship had sunk. Did something mysterious really happen to the Cotopaxi in the Bermuda Triangle? Later, Michael found the testimony of the ship's carpenter among some old papers. The carpenter claimed that the hatches covering the coal on the ship had been in a terrible condition before it sank. Repair work on the covers wasn't finished before the crew got the order to sail to Cuba. So if the hatch covers were still broken during the trip, water could have easily gotten on board. This water probably flooded the hold during the tropical storm. This was the real reason why the Cotopaxi went down. There was really nothing mysterious about it. It was just a mistake made by ordinary people. But this is just one example out of dozens, or even hundreds, where ships and planes have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. We still can't explain some of these incidents. It seems like there really is something weird going on there. One of these strange events happened in 1948. A passenger jet was headed for Miami from San Juan, Puerto Rico. It disappeared in the same area as the Cotopaxi. The 32 people on board vanished without a trace. The weather was clear throughout the flight, but experts think that when the plane was about 50 miles from the coast, it could have been hit by a strong wind that knocked it off course. Years later, a similar plane was found in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, but because no one could work out the registration, it was impossible to say for sure if it was the same one. Something even stranger occurred not long before, in 1945. 5 planes went missing all at the same time. Some trainee pilots were practicing their navigation skills. But when they'd finished, it seems they couldn't find their way back home and disappeared. Many people assume they just ran out of fuel. This seems likely, but still, the circumstances were really strange. The trainees were being supervised by an experienced pilot who had 2,500 hours of flight time. He would never have let a group of newbie pilots get that far away from their base. Even now, people still debate what could have happened. Some insist the pilots ran into something supernatural out there in the Bermuda Triangle. But who knows? And here's another freaky thing that happened there which no expert has been able to explain: time travel. In 1970, Bruce Gernon was flying a plane from Andros Island to the Florida coast. When he was at 11,500 feet, a giant cloud appeared in front of him. It kept getting bigger and bigger, and he had no choice but to fly through it. As soon as he did, the plane was surrounded by darkness. It was as if the day had turned to night in a split second. Suddenly, Bruce began to see white flashes of light around him. They were so bright that they lit up the entire sky. But they weren't lightning bolts, although he couldn't really explain what they were. The plane continued through the strange cloud for almost a half an hour. Bruce noticed that the cloud changed shape during this time. The space around the plane turned into a tunnel. Then the tunnel started narrowing. Bruce became really tense as he tried to cope with the plane's controls. All his instruments and navigation equipment were going crazy, and the electronics stopped working. Then, a white light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Just like in the movies, the plane escaped the closing cloud tunnel at the very last second. Everything was fine, but now Bruce found himself in some white fog. He had no idea where he was. Then he managed to contact ground control. He was shocked when he learned that his plane was already in the airspace above Miami. It seemed that something impossible had happened. Bruce was meant to cover a distance of about 250 miles during the flight. This usually took 1.5 hours, but he had managed it in just 47 minutes, almost 2 times faster than normal. When Bruce landed, he went to check the amount of fuel left in the tank. It turned out he'd used up a lot less than the normal amount of fuel as well. Could there be a logical explanation for the time-traveling plane? Well, records show that a large number of sunspots were detected on the surface of the sun that day, and there was a strong solar wind. This could easily have made the electronics and devices on the plane go crazy. But what about the mysterious cloud? The Florida coast is a place where 2 large air currents meet. One has a high pressure and the other is a low pressure one. This causes a lot of storm clouds in the area. But people still debate how Bruce was able to cover the distance so quickly. Some people say that some kind of mysterious dark energy was involved. Others say it was a gravitational anomaly that curves space and time. Others think that Bruce is just a fraud. We still don't know the truth. So, is there really something supernatural about the Bermuda Triangle? Or is it all just coincidences and made-up stories? The truth is that no more planes and ships disappear in the Bermuda Triangle than anywhere else in the world. It seems like we all cried watching the heartbreaking goodbye of Jack and Rose from the Titanic. Oops, spoiler, sorry. But the real-life stories from the sinking of the famous ship were no less touching. Joseph LaRoche was born in 1886 in Haiti to a wealthy family. He was growing up without a dad, but his mother was a self-made woman and a respected merchant. His uncle was the head of his country. Joseph was fluent in French, Creole, and English. At the age of 15, Joseph realized he wanted to become an engineer. There were no engineering schools in Haiti, so he moved to France to get his education. The journey took him a whopping 83 days. Still in his student years, Joseph met Juliet in a suburb of Paris through a mentor. They soon became friends, and then it grew into something bigger. The couple decided to get married. There was only one problem. Joseph couldn't find a well-paid qualified job even after completing his studies because of racial discrimination. The intelligent young man realized he could do better. Plus, he needed to provide for his growing family. His third kid was on the way. His uncle back in Haiti promised he'd help Joseph secure a job as a mathematics professor. His mother was overjoyed that her son and his family would be living in Haiti. She bought them first-class tickets for the French liner La France as a reunion gift. But that liner had really weird rules separating parents from their offspring for meals. The LaRoches didn't want to leave their youngsters and make them feel sad on a trip across the ocean. So they decided to trade their first-class tickets for La France for second-class tickets for RMS Titanic's maiden voyage. The Titanic was all the hype, and it didn't separate families, so it looked like a great deal. They planned to change for another ship in New York that would take them straight to their final destination in Haiti. The family boarded the Titanic on April 10, 1912, at Cherbourg. They had 3 days to enjoy the luxurious staterooms, a dining salon, a library, and 3 outdoor promenade decks available to second-class passengers. Juliet sent a letter to her father from Titanic's final stop in Queenston, Ireland. She told him they were more than happy with the accommodation. They had 2 bunks in their cabin and a couch that converted into a bed for their youngest family members. The family made friends with some nice co-passengers with whom they had traveled together from Paris. She thought they had been the only other French people on board, so they sat together for meals. Juliet mentioned they had all spent time together on the deck of the liner. She also wrote the people on board were friendly, although some sources say the family had gone through quite a lot of mean stares, gossip, and remarks. On the night of April 14th, their exciting journey came to an abrupt end. Even though Titanic's wireless operators had received warnings about drifting ice from nearby ships, the liner continued to plow ahead at full throttle. It was around 11:40 p.m. when Titanic's hull collided with the iceberg around 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. The practically unsinkable ship was severely under-equipped with lifeboats, enough for only about half of its 2,200 passengers. The nearest rescue ship, the Carpathia, was too far away to help. A steward woke up the LaRoche family and took them to the lifeboats, as Juliet remembered later. She couldn't speak any English, so everything that was going on seemed even scarier to her. A little after midnight, the crew received the order to give priority to women and children when boarding the lifeboats. Juliet later remembered a terrible panic had begun, as people had been pushing each other to get to the desired seat. At some point, she felt they had pulled away her older daughter and thrown her into the abyss. A moment later, she had joined her Simone in the same emptiness. So, pregnant Juliet and her 2 daughters got spots in Lifeboat 14. But they had to say goodbye to Joseph as the boat was being lowered into the sea. He wrapped his coat around Juliet, saying she'd need it, and promised to get in another lifeboat and see her and the little ones again in New York. The 25-year-old Joseph LaRoche didn't manage to stay true to his word. In a couple of hours, Titanic sank underwater, taking the lives of almost 1,500 people. Joseph was one of them. Juliet and the girls were among the 700 survivors who had been rescued by the Cunard liner Carpathia several hours later. Once they reached New York, they were looking through the crowds of people, hoping to see Joseph again. When it became obvious they wouldn't find him, it was time for them to decide what to do and where to go. Without any knowledge of English or money that had gone down with the ship, Juliet managed to survive in America only for 3 weeks, and then had no other choice but to go back to France. Joseph's uncle was no longer able to help them, as others had taken his life 4 months after the Titanic tragedy. In December 1912, Juliet gave birth to a son who she named Joseph after his father. For the rest of her life, she couldn't get over the loss of her beloved husband. That's why she didn't like to speak about what had happened on Titanic and told her children not to mention it. In 1995, a member of the Titanic Historical Society interviewed Louise, who was the last remaining LaRoche child and the last French survivor of the sinking. And that's when the world first heard about this heartbreaking story. It inspired some plays and articles, but it never got the same attention as the story of other passengers. You probably remember the elderly couple going down together in their bed on the Titanic. It was inspired by Isidor and Ida Strauss. They were both born in Germany and emigrated to the United States as kids. They met in New York and got married 5 years later. Isidor started a china and porcelain business with his brother that grew into the glassware department at Macy's and turned them into multimillionaires. Isidor and Ida were well known in New York, not only for their wealth and charity, but also for their love and devotion to each other. In 1912, the couple decided to run away from the New York winters and headed for Europe. By that time, they'd already been married for 40 years. In early April, it was time for them to sail back home to New York. They normally traveled on huge German liners, but at that time, they couldn't resist the hype of everyone talking about that new luxury liner, the RMS Titanic. That's how they ended up in one of the first-class private suites at the top of the ship. The Strauss couple spent their evenings dining in front of a live orchestra in a hall filled with fancy furniture and expensive wooden paneling. On the night of April 14th, they felt a slight tremor and then left their private suite and waited for instructions from the crew. They told the passengers not to lose their passes, as they'd need them when everyone got back on board. But the ship was going under. The Strauss couple were standing next to Lifeboat 8. Mr. Strauss, who was 67 at the time, was offered a seat with his wife because of his age. He refused it, saying he was not too old to sacrifice himself for a woman. He wanted to wait and make sure no women and kids were left behind. Ellen Bird, Ida's maid, hesitated before getting on the lifeboat, but Ida told her to go. She took the easy decision not to leave her husband on the sinking ship. Ida took off her beautiful mink coat and handed it to her shivering maid, saying she wouldn't be needing it anymore. Isidor didn't manage to convince her to save herself, so they stayed together till the end. Some of the surviving first-class passengers later remembered they had seen the couple standing peacefully on the deck, holding hands, just waiting.
The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!" The Titanic strikes the ice. Water starts flooding in. Third-class passengers are locked up. There aren't enough lifeboats for everyone. Panic sets in. Violins are playing. The ship sinks. Well, we all know the story of the movie Titanic like the back of our hand by now. But what if I told you that Hollywood lied to us? To tell the real story of what happened that freezing night in 1912, we need to rewind a bit. The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!" Yep, that part was true. Just before 11:40 at night, Frederick Fleet noticed something darker than the sea directly ahead. As the ship got closer, he realized it was an iceberg. The engines were quickly reversed and the ship turned sharply. Instead of hitting it head-on, Titanic scraped along the side of the berg, sprinkling ice on the forward deck. If you remember, in the movie, Jack and Rose are having a romantic moment when they feel the ship shudder after hitting the iceberg. Everything shakes as if they were in the middle of a light earthquake. Some real-life passengers reported feeling something similar after the impact, but according to Titanic survivor Frank Prentice, it wasn't exactly like that. He said there was no impact as such, and it all felt more like slamming on your car brakes. The ship stopped, and that was that. Some people even slept right through the collision, confirming that there wasn't such an abrupt impact. Mr. Prentice, curious about what had happened, left his cabin and went out to the deck. When he got there, all he could see was a little ice on the surface, not the towering iceberg that Jack and Rose saw. But as we all know by now, the real damage happened below the waterline, where the iceberg had a jagged spur that slashed a 300-foot gash in Titanic's hull. Once the crew realized how severe the damage was, they immediately began sending distress calls to nearby ships, asking for help. At some point in the movie, the radio operator goes to the captain and says there is only one ship nearby, the RMS Carpathia, which later ends up rescuing many passengers. But in real life, there were more ships around. It's believed that the SS Californian was only about 23 miles away. This ship might have actually seen the Titanic sinking, or at the very least, seen its rockets exploding high in the sky. Yet, for reasons we will never fully understand, they didn't try to help. Let's get back to the story. Now, people need to get off the ship. At 12:45, lifeboat number 7 was the first to be lowered. Just like in the movie, women and children were told to go first. But in reality, some women were hesitant and even refused to get into the lifeboats. Mr. Prentice said this happened mainly for 2 reasons. First, these lifeboats were high and passengers were terrified of the 70-foot drop from the deck to the ocean below. And second, most women didn't believe the Titanic would actually sink. It was called unsinkable after all. So the idea of getting into a lifeboat seemed pointless at the time. This mindset probably explains why Eloise Smith, a first-class passenger, recalled that there was no panic or chaos at first. Other survivors backed this up, saying that no women or kids were crying. But one thing that was indeed concerning, at least for the crew, was the possibility that the lifeboats might buckle under too much weight. This is one of the theories why the first few lifeboats left carrying only a fraction of their full capacity. Like lifeboat number 7, which only carried 27 people in it, even though it could hold up to 65. In total, Titanic had 20 lifeboats, which could carry about half of the 2,200 people on board that night. But that didn't happen. And now we know the passengers had no idea there weren't enough for everyone. As women were calmly getting into the first lifeboats, musicians headed up to the deck. Their only goal was to play and keep the passengers calm. That's a pretty well-known fact. But the real story is that some survivors said they never saw or heard the band. No violinists whatsoever. It's not like Hollywood misled you though. The musicians did play for over 2 hours after the ship had hit the iceberg. So maybe these passengers were just too panicked to notice the songs, or the musicians started playing later than we think. Now, it's time to talk about the terrible treatment that third-class passengers received. The movie portrayed the crew as cruel, locking the less fortunate below deck like animals, giving them no chance to reach the lifeboats and save their lives. But the official inquiry into the disaster suggested that wasn't true. I mean, yes, fewer third-class passengers survived compared to those in first and second class, but there were other factors at play. Many third-class passengers were reluctant to leave the ship, clinging to their belongings, and had a harder time making their way up from the cabins, which were at extreme ends of the ship. Some survivors confirmed that they were not locked up. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Mrs. George Wabi, a Lebanese woman traveling in third class, said that when chaos had erupted, some brave crew members and well-dressed first-class passengers had actually helped her get up to the first-class deck and eventually onto a lifeboat. At first, the Titanic was sinking slowly, bit by bit. Passengers reported seeing the water rising and hearing pops and cracks. Then, there was a loud boom. Some said there had been just one explosion, while others described it as a series of smaller explosions, which they'd thought had been the bulkheads giving way. And there's also a group of people who said they had only heard a rumbling sound. So not everyone agreed on the sound they had heard, but one thing is a fact. By 2:18 in the morning, the lights on Titanic went out, and the ship plunged into complete darkness. As the bow continued sinking, the stern rose out of the water, putting immense pressure on the middle of the ship. This caused the Titanic to break in two. In James Cameron's movie, this moment is pretty dramatic, with the ship sinking almost straight down into the water. But in reality, the break probably happened at a much lower angle, likely just below the waterline. Even so, it tilted enough that people couldn't stay on their feet and started sliding into the water. One interesting thing is that it wasn't until the wreckage was found in 1985 that it was finally confirmed the Titanic had broken apart. Up until then, survivors had given conflicting stories. At least 8 survivors claimed they had seen the ship split. Emily Ryerson, a first-class passenger, described it as if the Titanic had been sliced in half with a knife. But there was also a small number of witnesses that insisted Titanic had gone down intact. At the time, this theory was more accepted because most people still didn't believe that the supposedly indestructible ship could break in half. So why the conflicting reports? Okay, so what you don't see in the movies, for obvious reasons, is how incredibly dark it was when the tragedy happened. It was like being in a room with no light, where you can only make out shapes and shadows. That's what it was like on the lifeboats. This means passengers couldn't really see what was happening, and most of those who were close to the ship either lost their lives or were too focused on trying to survive to pay attention to the details of the wreck. Although James Cameron's film didn't fully capture how terrifyingly dark the disaster truly was, the 2012 TV series Titanic did a better job of showing the pitch-black horror of that night. Even then, the reality was much darker and more terrifying than either of these two productions could portray.
The cause of the Titanic crash was an iceberg, or so we've always been told. But new research has come to light that debunks this theory. On April 15, 1915, Titanic, the biggest ship of its time, completely disappeared under the ice-cold surface of the Atlantic Ocean. It's hard to believe that such a massive and expensive creation could be destroyed by one simple iceberg, right? Well, recent findings suggest that the real cause of the disaster was a fire, not an iceberg. For over 3 decades, journalist Senan Maloney has dedicated himself to studying the sinking of the Titanic. During his research, he made a significant discovery that shed new light on the well-known story. Maloney discovered a massive black spot on the hull of the Titanic, which measured an impressive 30 feet in length. He found it thanks to an unpublished album of photographs that showcased the construction and preparation of the ill-fated ship's first and final journey. Can you believe that most probably the fire on the Titanic had been burning at extreme temperatures for 3 whole weeks before anyone noticed it? Crazy, right? Apparently the high temperature corrupted the metal, making it 75% weaker. That's why the iceberg was able to make a hole in the ship. If not for the fire, the Titanic might have survived the crash because the iceberg apparently hit the exact spot we are talking about. And this is only one link in the chain of incredible coincidences that brought the Titanic down. The people in charge of the Titanic knew about the fire and knew the ship shouldn't have set sail. But they didn't want to go bankrupt and cancel the trip, especially since there was a coal shortage due to miners being on strike. The trip was already sold out, and there were no alternatives. Other ships canceled their trips due to low demand. Everyone wanted to board the Titanic, so the management bought up all the coal they could find, even from other ships, and set off. It was all about making money. To hide the truth, they turned the ship's hull so that the marks weren't visible from the dock and faced the sea. This way, the passengers wouldn't see them. Here's another sad twist in the Titanic's story. Back then, there weren't any sonar systems to detect danger, so specially trained people had to watch out for threats using binoculars. But the binoculars on the Titanic were locked away in a special compartment, and the only person with the key, Second Officer David Blair, was replaced last minute before the ship took off. He forgot to hand the key over to his replacement. This mistake wasn't discovered until 3 days later when the ship was already at sea. If they had the binoculars, they might have seen the iceberg in time and avoided the crash. But even if they had the binoculars, they might not have been able to avoid the crash because the Titanic was going faster than it was supposed to. They were behind schedule and didn't want to ruin the ship's reputation, so they were going way beyond the speed limits the ship's construction could sustain. One of the biggest mistakes made on the Titanic was the decision to not include enough lifeboats. Even though the ship needed around 60 of them to contain all the passengers, it was only equipped with 20. The designer, Alexander Carlisle, had initially planned for 48 lifeboats, but this number was reduced for aesthetic purposes. Apparently, having too many lifeboats would have made the deck look too cluttered. These 20 boats were only able to hold a third of the passengers on board, which was not nearly enough to save everyone in the event of an emergency. What's even more shocking is that this number of lifeboats was technically legal at the time. Regulations for lifeboats were based on the tonnage of the ship, not the number of passengers. This means that even though the Titanic was carrying thousands of people, it still met the legal requirements for lifeboat capacity. Another serious mistake made by the crew was the decision to cancel the lifeboat drill scheduled for the day of the disaster. Lifeboat drills were standard practice on ocean liners at the time, but for no apparent reason, Captain Edward John Smith chose to cancel it. This meant that passengers were not prepared for an emergency, and the crew was not adequately trained to handle the situation. When the ship hit the iceberg, chaos ensued, and it took over half an hour to launch the lifeboats instead of the usual 10 minutes. Some folks put the blame on Captain Smith for the fact that the first set of lifeboats left partially empty. The very first lifeboat, which had seats for 65 people, only carried 27 passengers. There is an objective reason for this. At the beginning, people were reluctant to abandon the ship and didn't understand the gravity of their situation. In 2012, researchers uncovered that Captain Smith failed his initial navigation exam. Although he eventually passed, some people wonder if this could have played a role in the disaster. During the Titanic's final moments, the crew attempted to send out distress signals to nearby ships, including the Californian. However, the Californian failed to respond to the flares shot into the sky, and the captain ultimately lost his job as a result of this negligence. However, recent research has exonerated the captain and proved his innocence. It turns out that light refraction, caused by layers of cold air below warmer air, created mirages that distorted the signals from the Titanic. This phenomenon had been observed by other ships sailing in the area and is now believed to be the reason why the lookouts on the Titanic missed the iceberg completely. Historian Tim Malton supports this theory and has further contributed to our understanding of this event. It's unfortunate that the captain of the Californian lost his job due to circumstances beyond his control, but it's better late than never that his reputation is cleared. Whatever the reason for Titanic's crash was, it still keeps the minds of scientists busy to this day. But let's see what the buzz was all about. What made the Titanic so famous and unique? The Titanic was massive, standing at 175 feet tall and nearly 900 feet long. The ship was so enormous that even the officers took over 2 weeks to memorize all the decks and passageways. You could be walking miles along its corridors. The construction cost of the ship was a whopping $7,500,000, which would be equivalent to about $166 million in the mid-2010 ES, due to inflation. Interestingly, the production cost of the Titanic movie in 1997 was even higher at $200 million. Building the Titanic was no small feat, and it required a labor force of 3,000 men who worked 6 days a week for 26 months. The job was difficult and dangerous, and workers had to complete tasks at the height of a 20-story building without safety ropes. Nevertheless, they were paid a competitive wage of £2 a week, which was considered good pay at the time. The inside of the Titanic was inspired by the luxurious Ritz Hotel in London. The most impressive feature of the ship's interior was the grand staircase, which extended through 7 of the ship's 10 decks. The staircase was adorned with ornate paintings, bronze cherubs, and oak paneling. The first-class passengers had access to an impressive array of facilities, including a heated swimming pool, Turkish bath, gym, squash court, beauty salon, and even a stylist to help them prepare for dinner. First-class passengers on the Titanic were pampered to an extraordinary extent. They had their own onboard newspaper, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin, and even their dogs were taken care of with a special area where they could be fed, walked, and trained during the voyage. The first-class meals were a grand affair, with 13 courses and a different wine for each course. These dinners could last up to 5 hours, and they were certainly something to look forward to. With such opulence and luxury on board, it's not surprising that so many people were eager to take the first trip on the Titanic.
Not a lot of people have heard of this mysterious body of water named after famous English explorer Sir Francis Drake. Even though Drake himself never sailed through these waters, one of his ships did pass near this location and discovered a connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That's how the area got named the Drake Passage in 1578. Soon enough, the passage became known for some mysterious disappearances. It got the reputation of being the roughest and most unpredictable stretch of water in the world. It's now known for its strong winds and rough seas, with waves that can reach up to 60 feet in height. The passage also has powerful currents with speeds never seen before. Does it sound like a good start to an adventure book? Sure, it doesn't make the place any less real. If you ever decide to travel between the southern tip of South America and the southern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, you will come across the infamous Drake Passage. We call this place the Drake Passage today, but locals still believe it should be named after Spanish explorer Francisco de Oces. He was a Spanish navigator who, in 1525, led the first known European expedition to navigate the Drake Passage. The trip was part of an attempt of Spain to find a new route to the Spice Islands in the East Indies. Oces and his two ships, the San Lesmes and the Santiago, sailed through the Strait of Magellan and into the Drake Passage, where they encountered treacherous weather and rough seas. Despite the difficulties, they successfully navigated the passage and became the first Europeans known to have done so. However, the expedition failed to find a new trade route, and the crew returned to Spain with no significant discoveries. Some years later, in 1616, another ship captained by Dutch navigator Willem Schouten made one of the most successful voyages through the Drake Passage. Despite the difficulties of navigating the often turbulent seas, eventually, the Drake Passage became an important part of international trade routes in the 19th and early 20th centuries. But this dangerous area holds many secrets. The record of one of the most famous events that happened here takes us back to the year 1914. During that time, a British explorer named Shackleton wanted to travel to Antarctica with 27 men split between two ships. Those were named the Endurance and the Aurora. The explorers wanted to check out two routes that reached the continent. But in 1915, the Endurance got stuck in ice while crossing the Drake Passage and was slowly crushed. Shackleton and his crew had to leave the ship and could only gather some personal belongings. The Endurance eventually sank, and the crew had to survive on ice for a while. The mission changed from exploring to surviving, and only in 1916 all the men were rescued. The Aurora suffered a similar fate. It also got stuck in ice, and 3 men were lost at sea before the rest of the crew was rescued in 1917. For many years, the ship Endurance was thought to have been lost forever. But in 2022, a group of specialists went on a trip to find it. They left from Cape Town, South Africa on February 5th. The leader of the group said it was most likely the most difficult shipwreck search in history. They used special equipment to find the ship under the water and then used a special underwater camera to take a closer look. The members of the team were sure they had found the Endurance because it was in a place where very few ships had ever been. Despite being 10,000 feet underwater, the Endurance didn't look so shabby. It was actually pretty well preserved for a ship that had been underwater for more than 100 years. The explorers were still even able to see the word Endurance written on it. But it's not just ships that have a hard time with the Drake Passage. A plane with 38 people on board seemed to have disappeared over the Drake Passage in 2019, according to the Chilean authorities. It's believed it hit the icy and rough waters of the passage. Rescuers used ships, planes, and satellites to search for the missing plane and its passengers in the area where it had last sent messages. But the harsh conditions of the Drake Passage made the search very difficult. The exact location where the accident had happened was eventually found, but there were no survivors. The Viking Polaris is another of those ships that got damaged in the passage, even though it was designed for tough conditions. It was faster than most ships and more stable because of special equipment that kept it balanced. One night, back in 2022, the waves were indeed big, but the ship seemed to be doing well in the rough weather. But then, on its way back to port in Ushuaia, Argentina, a rogue wave suddenly hit the ship without warning. People on board felt like they had been hit by an iceberg. Rogue waves are much taller than other waves around them, and they're very unpredictable. Scientists still don't know exactly why they occur. When this rogue wave hit the Viking Polaris ship, it immediately broke windows on the second deck. Some people on board were hurt, but thankfully, most of them had been properly trained before boarding the ship and knew what they had to do in case of an emergency. The crew was also very good at helping the passengers. Most of them even claimed later that they would board the ship for the second time, despite such an unexpected experience. The boat eventually made it to the port without suffering further damage. What makes this region so hard to cross, though? For starters, the Drake Passage is a wide and deep area of water. It's about 500 miles wide and has a depth of 15,000 feet. Even the most experienced sailors who cross the passage every year say it can be dangerous, unpredictable, and even scary at times. And that's even considering the modern technologies we have today. The area is a mix of warm and cold temperatures, which can result in ravishing storms. Strong winds from the west push the water from the Pacific Ocean into the passage, creating waves and swells that can reach up to 30 feet or more. If accidents happen here, things can get ugly faster than anywhere else. The Drake Passage is a part of the ocean where the water is very cold and has strong currents. The bottom of the ocean there is also not stable, making it harder to find things like a plane or a ship. These days, we have modern technology that helps us feel safe, even when we're passing through rough seas. However, if you are planning to travel by boat to Antarctica, make sure you're ready for the rough sea in the Drake Passage, and for feeling a little uneasy. This can happen even to the most experienced of people when the waters are rough, but it's especially tough if it's your first time. Some people bring remedies to avoid feeling sick, like ginger gum or scented wristbands. Others find it helpful to look at the horizon. Test things out to see what works for you. Once you arrive at the Drake Passage, you'll be surprised to see that lots of different animals live there. You can see many types of dolphins, birds, whales, and penguins. The water in the Drake Passage is also good for small animals like plankton, krill, which bigger animals such as whales, penguins, and seals generally have on their daily menus. As you get closer to Antarctica, watch out for the South Shetland Islands. These might be the first pieces of land you'll see. They're also located in the Antarctic Peninsula and were first discovered in 1819 by British explorer William Smith. The South Shetland Islands are home to severe active volcanoes, including Deception Island and Mount Fenton. The islands are also where you can find a number of endemic species, including the South Shetland Islands Gentoo penguin, which is only found on this piece of land.
Welcome to the Spirit of Discovery cruise ship, which will take you on an unforgettable sea voyage around the Canary Islands. The azure endless ocean, delicious food, the highest service, premium cabins, and a terrible nightmare that you will probably remember for the rest of your life. This is exactly how one luxury trip of the Saga Cruises Company ended last year. Instead of relaxing during the cruise, passengers felt fear and horror, and even had health problems. And that's why. On October 24th, the Spirit of Discovery liner started a 2-week cruise around the Canary Islands. There were about 1,500 people on board. About 1,000 were passengers, and the rest were crew members. The first week went great, but then the liner encountered a serious problem called nature. There were strong winds and big waves. The captain decided to return to the UK ahead of time, but the decision was made too late. The ship was caught in a severe storm in the Bay of Biscay. A powerful wind with a force of 11 points hit the vessel. To make it easier for you to understand, the 11-point wind is able to tear out trees together with roots, destroy residential buildings, and plunge entire cities into chaos. Such a storm is rare, but Spirit of Discovery was unlucky enough to get into its epicenter. 11 points is the penultimate place on the Beaufort scale, which determines the wind rating. The most powerful storm has 12 points, and this is a hurricane. The wind reached a speed of 65 miles per hour, which is about the same as the average speed of a car on a highway. Not only did it push the Spirit of Discovery, but it also raised huge waves 25 feet high. Just imagine a wall of water the height of a 3-story building collapsing on a lone ocean liner. At that moment, the captain sent a message to all the passengers through the cabin speakers so that no one left their place. And his voice sounded worried enough. All the passengers had to lie down and hold on tight. According to the witnesses' words, the ship remained caught in the storm for about 15 hours. They held on with all their might so as not to crash into the walls and floor. All this time, tables were flying around the ship, dishes were breaking, furniture was moving all over the cabins. The waves smashed windows, partitions, and doors. Some people were knocked down because they couldn't hold on for so long. The storm hurled the passengers from ceiling to floor, from wall to wall. The ship's crew turned the dining room into a medical area to provide assistance to those who had been hurt. Despite the difficult and terrible conditions, the ship's team did a great job. They regularly informed passengers about the current situation and tried to calm everyone down. There was no panic and chaos on board. When the storm finally ended, the ship continued its journey and finally reached land, where medics urgently evacuated 8 passengers to the hospital. One of them was never able to survive this storm. It's good the ship didn't meet a rogue wave during the storm. This is a natural phenomenon that can appear during a storm and even in still water. It's a giant wave with a height of 60 feet. Like a 6-story house, it collapses onto a ship with incredible speed and capsizes it. And then the wave suddenly disappears. This is no joke. A similar wave has been recorded in the Gulf Stream off of Charleston, South Carolina. It's scary to get in its way. Now, let's go back to the past to remember one of the most terrible maritime tragedies. No, we're not talking about the Titanic. We'll talk about the Greek liner Laconia, which set sail from the English port of Southampton on December 19, 1963, with more than 600 people on board. However, just 3 days later, a terrible tragedy happened to the ship in the boundless waters of the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., in the barbershop hall, an electrical malfunction occurred. The problem led to a fire, which quickly spread to other rooms. The crew couldn't cope with it, since the fire was spreading too fast. The ship's team turned on the fire alarm, but there was no command to leave the vessel. Only 2 hours later, the captain ordered the passengers to evacuate. All this time, people were either relaxing in their cabins or enjoying a party in the ballroom. The crew was probably trying to put out the fire without causing panic. However, when the situation became critical, the evacuation began. People panicked and ran to the lifeboats, but many didn't manage to get inside. One of them was John Morris. He survived this catastrophe and shared his memories of how he put his family in a lifeboat while he stayed on board the ship. He didn't even have a life jacket. Since there was nowhere to go, the ship's crew opened a bar so that people could relax a little. However, at that moment, boilers began to explode inside the ship, and it became clear the vessel wouldn't stay afloat for too long. John Morris decided to jump into the water right in his tuxedo. As soon as he was overboard, he grabbed onto a piece of wooden deck cargo and swam as far away from the ship as he could. The giant liner could sink at any moment, and when such a huge object goes down to the seabed, it forms a water funnel that pulls along everything around. Rescuers arrived at the scene sometime later. Fortunately, John Morris's pregnant wife and young son were alive, but his mother-in-law unfortunately didn't survive the disaster, like many other people that day. Of course, after this incident, the Greek Ministry of Merchant Marine initiated a thorough investigation. For 2 years, they collected information from passengers and the captain, studied the technical characteristics of the ship, and eventually came to certain conclusions. According to them, the ship's crew gave the evacuation order too late. Not all passengers were able to get into lifeboats, but half of those boats remained on board because of the chaos that prevailed during the evacuation. Several officers of the liner were accused of negligence, but the captain and his first mate received the most criticism. As for John Morris, he stated that he felt himself under protection that day. Another unusual story happened on a cruise ship relatively recently. Spoiler alert, the ship didn't sink, there was no evacuation, and the weather was good. However, for many passengers, this journey became a real challenge. Imagine that you've been working for a long time and saving up money to go on your dream trip on the Celebrity Mercury cruise ship in the Caribbean. You arrive in South Carolina, from where the ship begins its journey. You get on board, looking forward to a week's rest. At first, everything is fine. People are having fun, chefs are cooking delicious dishes, and beautiful daytime landscapes turn into night parties. But then suddenly, many passengers start throwing up. Someone is in a hurry to go to the toilet, and someone stays and vomits right in the halls. The cruise turns into chaos. More and more people feel terrible because of unknown poisoning. You also visited the restaurant and eaten seafood, but fortunately, the disease has avoided you, which can't be said for more than 400 other passengers. Almost every 1 in 4 people on board face gastrointestinal problems. There were almost 2,000 people, and a quarter of them are in bad condition. Crew members do endless cleaning. They wash the deck, give people nausea pills, and ask them not to leave the cabin till the illness passes. The captain sends several samples ashore to determine what caused the poisoning. Unfortunately, the cruise is already ruined, and all the passengers have unpleasant memories. So the company organizing the trip issues certificates that can be used on future cruises. It's not the most pleasant experience, but it's still better than nothing. Now, imagine if, instead of just feeling sick, people got infected with some kind of bacterium that would turn them into zombies. It would be much more exciting and scary. Now, do you think you could survive on such a ship full of zombies? And how would you do that? Tell me about it in the comments. The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life, so it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligallas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, Only one, John Omond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The Fiery Star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the Fiery Star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the Fiery Star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Oman, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape.
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Abydos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos. But Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Girza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the